Across the oceans lie stories of fortune and tragedy, ships that sailed with unimaginable wealth only to vanish into storms, reefs, and silence. From pirate flagships like the Witta Galley and Queen Anne's Revenge, to treasure galleons such as the San Jose, Atacha, and Merchant Royal, history is filled with wrecks that became legends. Some carried gold and silver to fuel empires. Others, like the Batavia or General Grant, ended in mutiny and survival against impossible odds. Along Africa's skeleton coast, the Bom Jesus lay buried in desert sands. Off the Americas, ships like El Cazador and La Lutine sank with fortunes that might still lie waiting. And beyond treasure, the legend of El Dorado lured fleets to their doom. These are tales of mystery, greed, and the relentless power of the sea. Join us as we dive into the world's greatest treasure and pirate mysteries, and don't forget to subscribe. The mystery of the Witta Galley. The sea has always carried with it secrets, treasures hidden beneath waves, and stories swallowed by the deep. Among these tales lies the legend of a single ship. A vessel built for commerce, stolen for conquest, and lost in a storm that sealed its fate. This ship was the Witta Galley, the world's only verified pirate treasure ship ever recovered from the ocean floor. The birth of the Witta was not born as a pirate ship. She was crafted in 1715 in London, designed as a state-of-the-art slave ship. At 102 feet long and capable of carrying up to 300 captives, the Witta represented the brutal commerce of the Atlantic slave trade. Her first voyages carried enslaved men, women, and children from West Africa to the Americas, where their lives were sold into bondage. But destiny would twist the Witta's course. On her second voyage in 1717, while loaded with gold, silver, indigo, ivory, and goods from the New World, she sailed into the sights of one of the most notorious pirates of the age, Samuel Bellamy, known to history as Black Sam. The pirate captain Samuel Bellamy's story is as compelling as the ship he captured. Born in England, he was young, ambitious, and disillusioned by the rigid class system that defined the 18th century. Bellamy crossed the Atlantic, drawn by the promise of fortune. He soon turned to piracy, rising quickly through charisma and a reputation for fairness. Unlike many brutal captains, Bellamy earned loyalty by treating his crew as equals. He became known as the Robin Hood of the seas, plundering the wealthy and distributing spoils among his men. Under his command, captured sailors were often spared, and his leadership style made him one of the most respected pirates of his day. When Bellamy seized the Witta Galley, he immediately recognized its potential. Its size, speed, and firepower made it an ideal flagship. Stripped of its grim role in human trafficking, it became a floating fortress of piracy. A floating empire of treasure. For a brief but dazzling period, the Witta ruled the waves. Bellamy and his crew plundered ships along the American coast and in the Caribbean, seizing immense riches. In the spring of 1717, the ship was heavily laden, not only with precious metals and coins but also with exotic goods, jewelry, and trade items gathered from over 50 captured vessels. Yet, for all its power, the Witta was vulnerable to the same danger every sailor feared, the fury of the sea itself. The fateful storm on April 26, 1717, the Witta sailed north along Cape Cod, Massachusetts. A violent nor'easter struck. The storm's waves rose like mountains, and winds tore at the rigging. Despite Bellamy's skill, the Witta was no match for nature's wrath. The ship struck a sandbar near Wellfleet, just 500 yards from shore. Within moments, the pounding surf broke the vessel apart. Out of nearly 150 souls aboard, only 2 survived. Samuel Bellamy himself perished, his body claimed by the storm. The wreck carried with it not just human lives, but also the immense treasure Bellamy had amassed. For centuries, stories spread of gold and silver buried beneath the shifting sands and waters of Cape Cod. Locals whispered of coins washing ashore, fueling legends of pirate treasure hidden just out of reach. Rediscovery of a legend. For over 260 years, the Witta remained lost. Countless treasure hunters searched in vain, guided by rumor and fragments of history. Then, in 1984, marine explorer Barry Clifford made a discovery that changed maritime history. Diving near Cape Cod, Clifford uncovered cannons, timbers, and most importantly, hundreds of concreted coins and artifacts. Soon after, a ship's bell was recovered, clearly inscribed with the word Wida. For the first time in history, a pirate shipwreck had been verified and recovered. The Wida was no longer legend, it was fact. What lies beneath? Since its discovery, the wreck has yielded a trove of over 200,000 artifacts. Gold coins, silver bars, jewelry, muskets, and everyday objects like buttons and buckles have surfaced from the sand. Each item offers a glimpse into the lives of pirates, not only the pursuit of wealth, but the ordinary routines of men at sea. Among the finds are personal items believed to have belonged to Samuel Bellamy himself, including a pistol and a sword hilt. Archaeologists have also recovered evidence of the Wida's earlier, darker past as a slave ship, including shackles. What makes the Wida unique is not simply the treasure, but its status as a rare time capsule of piracy's golden age. Unlike tales of buried chests on distant islands, the Wida's hoard is tangible, catalogued, and studied by historians. The mystery that remains yet, even with thousands of artifacts recovered, questions linger. Accounts suggest that the Wida carried over 4.5 tons of treasure. What has been found so far is only a fraction of that estimated wealth. The shifting sands of Cape Cod may still conceal vast riches, or perhaps the storm scattered them irretrievably into the deep. Another mystery lies with Bellamy himself. His body was never identified. Some believe he washed ashore and was buried anonymously by locals. Others whisper that he may have survived, though history provides no evidence. The absence of closure keeps his legend alive, a pirate lost to the sea yet immortalized by the ship he commanded. The Wida today, the recovered artifacts from the Wida are preserved and displayed at the Wida Pirate Museum in West Yarmouth, Massachusetts. They offer visitors a direct connection to the golden age of piracy. Buttons once fastened by sailors, coins touched by their hands, and weapons wielded in raids, all tell the story of men who lived and died under the black flag. But beyond the glass cases and museum walls, the wreck itself still lies beneath Cape Cod's restless waters. Each storm shifts the sands, revealing new relics or hiding them again. The sea, in its eternal rhythm, guards the secrets of the Wida as fiercely today as it did on the night it sank. Closing reflection: the Wida galley is more than just a shipwreck. It is a reminder of humanity's dual nature, the cruelty of the slave trade and the allure of freedom under the pirate flag, the promise of fortune and the inevitability of loss. Its story bridges myth and history, showing us how legends are made, and how they endure. And still, beneath the waves off Cape Cod, the Wida sleeps. With every storm that passes, the question stirs once more: how much treasure remains, and what other secrets of the pirate age lie waiting to be uncovered? The Queen Anne's Revenge. The image of the pirate is inseparable from one name. A man whose dark figure loomed over the seas, his very presence enough to send ships fleeing without a fight. His vessel became a floating nightmare, the embodiment of terror itself. That ship was the Queen Anne's Revenge, and its story is one of power, mystery, and a dramatic end shrouded in questions. Origins of the ship. The Queen Anne's Revenge was not built for piracy. Like so many vessels that would later fly the black flag, it began as a merchant ship. Constructed in Britain in 1710 and launched under the name La Concorde, she was a French slave ship, an armed frigate designed to carry hundreds of captives across the Atlantic in one of history's darkest trades. For several years, La Concorde made the brutal triangular voyage, French goods to Africa, enslaved men and women to the Caribbean, and sugar and tobacco back to Europe. In 1717, during one such voyage, destiny intervened. Off the coast of Martinique, the ship encountered the pirate Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. Blackbeard seizes his prize. Blackbeard's capture of La Concorde was swift and decisive. He stripped the vessel of its former identity and gave it a new name, Queen Anne's Revenge. The choice was deliberate. Queen Anne's War had ended only a few years before, leaving many English privateers unemployed. By naming his ship after the deposed monarch, Blackbeard made a political statement, invoking nostalgia for a cause long lost and declaring his defiance against the new order. The Queen Anne's Revenge was more than symbolic, it was formidable. Armed with as many as 40 cannons, it dwarfed the average merchantman and outgunned most naval vessels patrolling the Caribbean. With this ship, Blackbeard rose from an ambitious pirate captain to one of the most feared figures in the Atlantic world. Terror on the Seas accounts of Blackbeard describe him as a master of psychological warfare. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and terrifying in appearance. Before battle, he is said to have tied slow-burning fuses into his thick black beard, the smoke curling around his face like the very image of a demon rising from the underworld. Sailing the Queen Anne's Revenge, he blockaded ports, raided merchant ships, and spread chaos along the American coast. His most infamous act came in May 1718, when he led a blockade of Charleston, South Carolina. For nearly a week, no ship could enter or leave the harbor. Panic spread through the city. Blackbeard eventually released his hostages only after securing medical supplies. The daring act cemented his reputation as a pirate who could defy entire colonies. The mysterious wreck yet, only weeks later, the Queen Anne's Revenge was lost. In June 1718, while attempting to enter the shallow inlet near Beaufort, North Carolina, the ship ran aground on a sandbar. Contemporary accounts suggest the vessel was stranded and abandoned, while Blackbeard and a select few sailed away in smaller craft. Why such a powerful ship would be lost so easily has remained a mystery. Some historians believe it was an accident, an overconfident maneuver in treacherous waters. Others suspect deliberate sabotage. Running the ship aground may have been Blackbeard's way of downsizing his crew, keeping the best men and treasure while leaving others stranded. The fate of the Queen Anne's Revenge left questions that still linger. Was it incompetence, or cunning? Accident, or betrayal? The hunt for the wreck for nearly 3 centuries, the Queen Anne's Revenge lay hidden beneath sand and sea. Rumors of its resting place swirled along the Carolina coast, but no one could prove its location. Then, in 1996, a private research team discovered a wreck near Beaufort Inlet. What they found stunned archaeologists: anchors the size of small trees, cannon after cannon, and piles of musket shot. After years of study, experts confirmed that this was indeed the legendary flagship of Blackbeard. For the first time, the world had physical evidence of a pirate ship commanded by history's most infamous outlaw. Artifacts from a pirate's world excavations of the wreck have yielded more than 300,000 artifacts. These range from massive cannons and anchor chains to everyday tools, surgeons' instruments, and navigational equipment. Even fragile items, glass beads, pewter plates, fragments of books, have survived centuries beneath the sea. Among the discoveries are treasures not of gold and silver, but of knowledge. Archaeologists have found evidence of how pirates lived aboard their ships, improvised repairs, stolen goods from many nations, and weapons ready for battle. They also uncovered personal items, reminders that behind the legend were men who ate, worked, fought, and died on this vessel. The legacy of Blackbeard himself did not long survive the loss of his flagship. Only 5 months later, in November 1718, he was killed in battle near Ocracoke Island, North Carolina. Accounts describe a ferocious fight. Blackbeard received more than 20 wounds before finally falling. His head was severed and displayed from a ship's bowsprit, a grim warning to others who dared to follow his path. But his legend only grew. Stories spread of hidden treasure, ghostly apparitions, and the enduring fear of the name Blackbeard. The Queen Anne's Revenge, though buried, remained central to that legend. Mystery that remains even with the wreck uncovered, mysteries endure. The ship ran aground in shallow water, yet many believe its true treasure may have been removed before its loss. Was there gold and silver hidden elsewhere, spirited away by Blackbeard before the grounding? Archaeologists have yet to find large caches of wealth on the site, suggesting either they never existed aboard, or they were carefully taken before abandonment. Another question lingers: did Blackbeard intentionally sacrifice the Queen Anne's Revenge to consolidate power, or was he undone by the very seas he sought to command? The Queen Anne's Revenge today, the wreckage of the Queen Anne's Revenge lies preserved by state archaeologists in North Carolina. Artifacts are cleaned, stabilized, and displayed in museums, offering the public a rare window into the age of piracy. Each recovered cannon, each fragment of pottery, carries with it the weight of legend. The ship continues to inspire books, films, and countless retellings of Blackbeard's exploits. More than a wreck, it is a cultural icon, a reminder of an age when the boundaries of law and rebellion blurred upon the sea. Closing reflection: the Queen Anne's Revenge is more than wood and iron. It is a vessel of stories, the brutality of the slave trade, the defiance of men who turned pirate, the terror of coastal towns, and the enduring mystery of its loss. It represents the thin line between power and ruin, a ship that burned brightly in history before vanishing beneath the waves. And yet, beneath the shifting sands of Beaufort Inlet, the Queen Anne's Revenge still holds secrets. Each artifact uncovered deepens the story, but questions remain. Did Blackbeard abandon his greatest prize by accident, or by design? Perhaps the sea itself knows the answer, and, as always, it keeps its silence. The San Jose galleon: the ocean holds more treasure than any vault on land. Beneath its depths lie the remains of empires, fortunes made and lost, and legends whispered for centuries. Among these sunken stories, one ship stands above all others. A vessel of immense wealth, destroyed in fire and fury, and hidden from the world for over 3 centuries. This is the story of the San Jose galleon, the shipwreck known as the Holy Grail of the seas. A ship of empire, the San Jose was no ordinary vessel. Built in 1698 in Spain, she was a 64-gun galleon and the pride of the Spanish treasure fleet. In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, Spain's empire stretched across the Americas. From silver mines in Peru to emerald fields in Colombia, wealth flowed steadily toward Europe. But moving this fortune required heavily armed convoys, for the seas were prowled not only by storms but by rival nations and pirates. The San Jose's role was central, to carry immense cargoes of silver, gold, and precious stones from the New World back to Spain. She embodied the dual nature of empire, military power fused with economic ambition. A fateful voyage in 1708, during the War of the Spanish Succession, the San Jose set sail from Cartagena, Colombia. On board was one of the richest cargoes ever assembled, gold and silver coins, emeralds, and precious goods valued at an estimated 11 million pesos, a staggering fortune in its day. But the Caribbean waters were no longer safe. British naval forces patrolled the region, determined to intercept Spain's treasure ships and cut off the lifeline of empire. The San Jose, leading a fleet of galleons, sailed directly into danger. Battle off Baru on June 8, 1708, near the island of Baru off Cartagena, the Spanish fleet clashed with a British squadron under Commodore Charles Wager. What followed was later called Wager's Action. The San Jose became the focus of the battle. Her 64 guns thundered against the British ships, and for hours the fight raged in the tropic night. Then disaster struck. Whether from enemy fire or an accidental spark, the galleon's powder magazine ignited. In a deafening explosion, the San Jose erupted into flames. Witnesses described a fiery column lighting the night sky as the ship broke apart and sank. Of nearly 600 aboard, only a handful survived. Along with the lives lost went her immense treasure, swallowed by the sea. The legend of lost treasure: from the moment she sank, the San Jose became legend. Rumors spread of unimaginable riches lying in the depths, chests of gold, silver, emeralds, enough to rival the treasuries of kings. Over the centuries, explorers, adventurers, and treasure hunters dreamed of finding her. But the waters off Cartagena are treacherous, with shifting sands and countless wrecks. The exact resting place of the San Jose remained elusive. Each passing century deepened the mystery, making her the most coveted shipwreck in history. Rediscovery beneath the waves in 2015, after centuries of speculation, the Colombian government announced a historic discovery: the wreck of the San Jose had been located. Using advanced sonar, submersibles, and underwater imaging, archaeologists identified a site nearly 600 meters below the surface. Cannons with distinctive dolphin engravings confirmed the identity of the ship. For the first time in over 300 years, the San Jose was no longer just a legend. It was real, preserved in the cold darkness of the sea. The treasure debate. The discovery reignited not only wonder but also controversy. Who owns the treasure of the San Jose? The Colombian government claims sovereignty, as the ship sank in its territorial waters. Spain has asserted rights, arguing it was a Spanish warship carrying state treasure. Indigenous groups from Bolivia have also raised claims, since much of the silver and gold was mined through forced labor in South America. International law adds complexity. Should the wreck be treated as cultural heritage, protected for study, or as treasure to be recovered and divided? Estimates suggest the cargo could be worth up to $17 billion in today's values. Such a fortune makes the San Jose not just an archaeological site, but one of the most valuable shipwrecks ever discovered. A window into history beyond its treasure, the San Jose is a time capsule of the early 18th century. Archaeologists believe the wreck could reveal insights into naval warfare, trade networks, and daily life aboard a galleon. Cannons, ceramics, navigational instruments, and even personal belongings may still lie preserved in the silt. Studying these artifacts may illuminate how sailors lived and fought, how Spain maintained its empire, and how the great navies of Europe clashed for supremacy. In many ways, the San Jose represents more than wealth, it represents history frozen at the moment of catastrophe. Mystery that remains, yet mysteries endure. How much of the treasure cargo still lies intact? Did some of it scatter across the seafloor when the ship exploded? And why exactly did the magazine ignite? Was it a British cannonball, a Spanish mistake, or something else lost to time? The wreck lies deep, beyond the reach of casual divers, guarded by technology and law. For now, only glimpses from robotic cameras reveal its secrets: cannons draped in marine growth, timbers half buried, shadows of a vanished empire resting silently in the deep. The San Jose today. Colombia has pledged to recover the wreck carefully, creating a museum and research facility to preserve the artifacts. Yet debates over ownership continue in international courts, delaying full excavation. For now, the San Jose remains in place, untouched, a treasure chest sealed by the sea. Each announcement of new imagery rekindles the fascination, reminding the world that one of the greatest fortunes in history still lies hidden beneath the waves. Closing reflection: the San Jose galleon is more than a shipwreck. It is a story of empire and ambition, of wealth and destruction, of mystery and memory. Its sinking marked the violent struggle of nations, the fragility of human power before the sea, and the enduring allure of treasure lost. Today, the wreck rests in silence, its gold and emeralds unseen for 3 centuries. Perhaps one day they will rise again to the surface, studied and displayed for the world. Or perhaps the ocean will keep its greatest prize forever. For in the end, the San Jose reminds us of a timeless truth: the sea does not easily give up its secrets. Flor de la Mar: the sea has swallowed countless ships, but only a few have vanished with fortunes so immense they became legends. Among them is one vessel whose name still echoes through history, the Flor de la Mar, the flower of the sea. A Portuguese galleon laden with unimaginable treasure, she disappeared into the depths, leaving behind questions, myths, and the allure of lost gold. Birth of a masterpiece: the Flor de la Mar was launched in 1502 from Lisbon. At more than 400 tons, she was one of the largest ships of her era, built at the dawn of Europe's age of exploration. She was a galleon of power and prestige, a flagship meant to carry Portugal's ambitions across the oceans. Commanded initially by Estevão da Gama, cousin of famed navigator Vasco da Gama, the vessel joined the Portuguese India Armadas, part of a fleet seeking control of the lucrative spice trade. Yet from the beginning, Flor de la Mar was troubled. Her size made her majestic but also unwieldy. Records describe her as difficult to steer, especially in heavy seas. Twice she was nearly lost to storms, forced into emergency repairs in India. Still, her career continued. For almost 9 years, she sailed between Lisbon, Africa, and Asia, linking empires across oceans. The fall of Malacca: by 1511, Flor de la Mar was under the command of Afonso de Albuquerque, one of Portugal's greatest conquerors. Albuquerque had just led a campaign against the powerful Sultanate of Malacca, on the Malay Peninsula. Malacca was a hub of global trade, spices, silks, precious metals, all passed through its harbor. Controlling Malacca meant controlling the gateway between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. When the city fell, Albuquerque seized a staggering amount of wealth. Chronicles speak of treasures looted from the Sultan's palace: gold, silver, jewels, rare porcelain, and priceless artifacts. Some accounts even describe ceremonial furniture and manuscripts of great cultural value. All of it was loaded aboard the Flor de la Mar, intended as tribute for King Manuel I of Portugal. This cargo made the ship legendary. Historians estimate its value at many tons of gold and riches beyond calculation, potentially the greatest single treasure ever carried by a European vessel. The final voyage, but the Flor de la Mar was already old, worn, and unstable. Despite warnings, Albuquerque chose her to transport the treasure back to Lisbon. In November 1511, the galleon set sail from Malacca, heavily laden and accompanied by a fleet. As she crossed the treacherous waters of the Strait of Malacca, disaster struck. A violent storm engulfed the ship near the coast of Sumatra. With her overloaded hull and poor design, Flor de la Mar could not withstand the waves. She broke apart on a reef, splitting open her cargo hold. The treasure spilled into the sea, vanishing beneath the storm-tossed waters. Albuquerque survived, clinging to wreckage, but the flower of the sea was gone, along with her legendary fortune. A treasure beyond compare. The loss of the Flor de la Mar became one of the greatest maritime tragedies of the 16th century. Unlike later galleons that carried annual shipments, this was a one-time, extraordinary haul, that concentrated wealth of a fallen kingdom. Eyewitnesses claimed it was the richest cargo ever assembled. Portuguese chroniclers lamented the loss not just in terms of wealth, but as a blow to empire. The riches could have transformed Lisbon, funding wars and monuments, strengthening Portugal's hold on the seas. Instead, the ocean claimed it all. The search for the flower. For more than 500 years, treasure hunters have searched for the Flor de la Mar. The Strait of Malacca, however, is a perilous place. Strong currents, shifting sands, and heavy shipping traffic make exploration difficult. The exact site of the wreck remains unknown. Dozens of expeditions have scoured the region with sonar and diving equipment. Some have claimed discoveries, but none have produced verified evidence. Artifacts occasionally surface: coins, ceramics, fragments of shipwrecks, but none conclusively linked to the Flor de la Mar. The mystery is compounded by politics. The waters off Sumatra and Malacca lie within contested zones, and both Malaysia and Indonesia claim rights to the wreck. For archaeologists, international law now treats the Flor de la Mar not just as treasure, but as cultural heritage. Still, the lure of billions in gold ensures that private expeditions continue to dream of finding her. Legend or reality? Some historians question whether the treasure was as vast as later tales suggest. Could chroniclers have exaggerated, turning a great loss into a myth of impossible riches? Others argue the accounts are consistent. Malacca was one of the wealthiest cities in Asia, and Albuquerque's seizure was monumental. Even if the Flor de la Mar carried only a fraction of the treasure described, it would still rank among the richest shipwrecks in history. The fact that none of it has been recovered only fuels speculation. Was the treasure scattered irretrievably by currents? Is it buried beneath centuries of sediment? Or does it still rest, intact, waiting in the deep? Legacy of the flower of the sea. The Flor de la Mar is remembered not only for its treasure, but for what it symbolizes. It was a turning point in global history, the collision of Europe and Asia, the conquest of trade routes, and the fragility of empires built on greed. Today, her story lives on in museums, books, and legends. For Portugal, she remains a reminder of both triumph and loss. For Indonesia and Malaysia, she is part of a contested heritage. And for treasure hunters, she is the ultimate prize, a dream that refuses to fade. Closing reflection. The Flor de la Mar was a ship of contradictions, magnificent and flawed, triumphant and doomed. She carried the weight of empires, only to be undone by the sea. Her wreck remains hidden, her treasure unfound, her story unfinished. As the waves continue to crash across the Strait of Malacca, one question lingers like a whisper over the water: will the flower of the sea ever be found? For now, the ocean keeps her secret, as it has for more than 5 centuries. Nuestra Señora de Atocha. The ocean floor is a graveyard of ships. Some sank in storms, others in battles, and many vanished without a trace. Yet among them, one name stands out, a Spanish galleon whose loss crippled an empire, and whose rediscovery centuries later changed the world of treasure hunting forever. This is the story of the Nuestra Señora de Atocha. A ship of empire, the Nuestra Señora de Atocha, was launched in 1620 from Havana, Cuba. She was a heavily armed galleon, built to protect the riches of the Spanish Empire. For over a century, Spain had extracted silver, gold, emeralds, and pearls from its colonies in the Americas. Each year, fleets of treasure ships would gather in Havana, then sail across the Atlantic to deliver this wealth to the crown. The Atocha was part of the Tierra Firme fleet, carrying treasure from South America. Her cargo represented the lifeblood of Spain's empire. But with great riches came great risk. Pirates, privateers, and rival navies prowled the seas. To safeguard its fortune, Spain armed its galleons with cannons and sailed them in convoys, guarded by warships. The treasure cargo in 1622, the Atocha, was loaded with one of the richest cargoes ever assembled. From Cartagena and Portobello came silver coins, gold bullion, copper, tobacco, and indigo. From Colombia's emerald mines came gems of unmatched clarity. Altogether, the ship carried an estimated 40 tons of silver, 125 gold bars, and thousands of emeralds, a treasure so vast it seemed invincible. But the Atocha was not ready to sail when the fleet departed Havana in September 1622. Still undergoing repairs, she was assigned a vulnerable position, toward the rear of the convoy. It would prove fatal. The storm on September 4, 1622, just days after departure, disaster struck. A hurricane roared across the Florida Straits. Winds tore sails to ribbons, waves smashed against timbers, and the fleet was scattered. Several ships went down, but the Nuestra Señora de Atocha was hit hardest. Driven onto a reef near the Florida Keys, the galleon broke apart. Her hull splintered, masts snapped, and water poured into the cargo holds. Within moments, the Atocha sank, carrying nearly all of her 260 passengers and crew to their deaths. Only a handful survived, clinging to wreckage. For Spain, the loss was catastrophic. The Atocha's treasure was meant to pay soldiers, finance wars, and sustain the empire. Now it lay beneath the sea. A desperate search in the weeks that followed, Spain launched frantic salvage efforts. Divers using crude equipment managed to recover some items from shallower wrecks, but the Atocha lay beyond reach, in deeper waters. Hurricanes struck again the following year, scattering the wreck further and sealing it from recovery. The Atocha became a ghost of empire, remembered in archives, whispered about in ports, and marked on maps as a fortune lost to the sea. For centuries, treasure hunters dreamed of finding her, but the ocean guarded its secret well. A modern obsession in the 20th century, the Atocha's legend inspired one man to devote his life to the search, Mel Fisher, an American treasure hunter. Beginning in the 1960s, Fisher and his team scoured the waters off the Florida Keys, guided by old charts, records, and sheer determination. The search was grueling. Years passed with little to show but scattered coins and artifacts. Equipment failed, storms destroyed progress, and investors grew impatient. Fisher himself lost family in diving accidents. Still, he pressed on, repeating his daily motto, "Today's the day." The discovery in 1985, after 16 years of searching, Fisher's persistence was rewarded. Near the Marquesas Keys, divers uncovered a field of silver bars, each stamped with Spanish markings. Soon, they found gold chains, emeralds, and cannon. The Atocha had finally been found. What followed was one of the greatest treasure recoveries in history. Over the next years, Fisher's team raised thousands of coins, ingots, and jewels. Among the most famous finds was a single emerald weighing 77 carats, dazzling in its deep green brilliance. The total haul was valued at over 400 million, though its historical value is priceless. Controversy and legacy. The discovery sparked legal battles. The state of Florida initially claimed rights to part of the treasure. After years in court, the U.S. Supreme Court awarded ownership to Fisher and his investors. The ruling set a precedent for modern treasure salvage, reshaping how governments and hunters contested wrecks. Today, artifacts from the Atacha are preserved in museums, private collections, and Fisher's own legacy foundation. Coins and ingots continue to surface from the wreck site, as storms and currents reveal new pieces of the past. Mystery that remains. Even with the incredible discoveries, questions linger. Some historians believe much of the Atacha's cargo still lies undiscovered, scattered across the seafloor. Maps and manifests suggest that not all of the galleon's holds have been located. Divers still return to the site, convinced that the ocean has more treasure to yield. Beyond the gold and silver, the Atacha carries mysteries of human stories. Who were the passengers lost that night? What personal belongings sank with them? What untold histories remain buried beneath coral and sand? Closing reflection. The story of the Nuestra Señora de Atacha is one of triumph and tragedy, greed and perseverance. For Spain, her loss was a financial disaster that weakened an empire. For treasure hunters, her rediscovery was the fulfillment of centuries of legend. Yet even today, the Atacha remains partly hidden. She is not just a shipwreck but a symbol of the risks empires took, the power of the sea, and the human drive to seek, to search, to uncover what lies beyond reach. Beneath the waves of the Florida Keys, her timbers may be gone, but her spirit endures. Each recovered coin or emerald is a reminder that history still waits in silence, until someone dares to find it. Batavia, mutiny and wreck. The sea has claimed many ships, but few stories combine tragedy, greed, and horror like that of the Batavia. Launched as a proud vessel of commerce, she met her end not only in a wreck upon a reef, but in a nightmare of mutiny and massacre that shocked the world. This is the haunting tale of the Batavia. A ship of the Dutch Golden Age. The year was 1628. The Dutch Republic was at the height of its power, its merchants dominating global trade. At the heart of this empire was the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, the most powerful trading corporation in the world. The Batavia, newly built in Amsterdam, was one of its finest ships. A great East Indiaman, she stretched over 50 meters long, bristling with cannons, and packed with supplies for the long voyage to the East Indies. Her mission was to carry trade goods, soldiers, and officials to the VOC's colonies, and to return with spices, silks, and treasures from Asia. On October 27, 1628, the Batavia set sail from the Netherlands, bound for Java. Aboard were more than 300 passengers, soldiers, sailors, merchants, and civilians. Among them were two men whose choices would steer the voyage toward disaster. The seeds of treachery. The first was Francisco Pelsaert, the commander, a VOC merchant charged with overseeing the voyage. The second was Geronimus Cornelis, a discontented apothecary from Haarlem. Charismatic, intelligent, and deeply ambitious, Cornelis harbored a dangerous plan. He and a small group of conspirators intended to seize the Batavia. Their goal, to murder the officers, take the treasure aboard, and transform the ship into a pirate vessel. They waited for the right moment, all the while spreading whispers of discontent among the crew. But before the mutiny could be launched, fate intervened. The wreck on the reef on June 4, 1629, after more than 7 months at sea, the Batavia struck a reef in the Houtman Abrolhos Islands, off the coast of Western Australia. The coral tore open her hull. Within hours, the ship was wrecked beyond hope of repair. Survivors scrambled to the barren islets. Supplies were limited, brackish water, little food, no shelter. Commander Pelsaert, with some officers, set out in a small boat to seek rescue, leaving the majority of survivors behind. Into this vacuum of authority stepped Geronimus Cornelis. The reign of terror. Cornelis seized control, quickly revealing the true extent of his ambition. Declaring himself leader, he organized followers into armed bands. Soon, his leadership turned to brutality. Cornelis began eliminating those he viewed as threats. Survivors unwilling to submit were executed. Women were taken as concubines. Over the course of weeks, Cornelis orchestrated a reign of terror that claimed more than 100 lives, men, women, and even children slaughtered on the desolate islands. But his cruelty did not go unchallenged. A group of soldiers, led by Weeb Hayes, managed to resist. Retreating to another island, Hayes and his men built fortifications and prepared for battle, determined to survive Cornelis' tyranny. Mutiny and battle. When Cornelis attempted to crush Hayes and his men, he was met with fierce resistance. The mutineers were defeated, and Cornelis was captured. But even as he was imprisoned, his loyalists launched desperate attacks, turning the barren islands into battlegrounds. Then, in late September 1629, salvation arrived. Commander Pelsaert had returned with a rescue ship, the Sardam. He was confronted with the shocking reality of what had happened in his absence: mass graves, terrified survivors, and the captured mutineers. Justice at sea. Pelsaert wasted no time in delivering justice. Trials were held on the islands themselves. Cornelis and several ringleaders were executed by hanging, their bodies left as warnings. Others were taken back to Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, for punishment. The Batavia tragedy became infamous across Europe. It was a cautionary tale of human greed and cruelty when stripped of law and order, a story that showed how quickly civilization can collapse in isolation. The wreck rediscovered for centuries, the wreck of the Batavia remained hidden. In 1963, divers located the remains on the reef off Western Australia. Salvage operations uncovered cannons, timbers, coins, and other artifacts, many of which are now preserved in the Western Australian Museum. A partial reconstruction of the ship was built in Lelystad, the Netherlands, allowing visitors to experience the scale of the vessel that became the stage for one of history's darkest maritime dramas. Legacy of the Batavia. The Batavia stands apart from other shipwrecks. While many are remembered for their treasure or mysteries, this story is remembered for its human tragedy. It is not just a tale of a ship lost, but of what happened after, a descent into violence and tyranny on the desolate shores of a continent not yet colonized by Europeans. For Australia, it represents the earliest European contact with its western coast, centuries before settlement. For the Netherlands, it is a haunting reminder of the VOC's global reach and the risks of empire. And for the world, it is a case study in how power and desperation can corrupt, even among castaways. Closing reflection. The wreck of the Batavia is more than a maritime disaster. It is a story of survival and savagery, of leadership twisted into tyranny, and of courage that resisted the darkness. Today, the waters off Western Australia still hold fragments of her timbers. On the islands, the wind whispers over silent graves. And the question remains, when law and order vanish, what choices will humanity make? The Batavia reminds us that sometimes, the greatest wreck is not of a ship, but of the human soul. The Grosvenor, shipwreck and mystery. The sea is both a highway of empires and a graveyard of ambition. For centuries, ships carrying fortunes of trade have set out across oceans, never to be seen again. Among these, few wrecks have left behind such haunting questions as that of the Grosvenor. A British East Indiaman lost on the wild coast of South Africa, it became not only a story of survival and loss, but of mystery that still lingers today. A ship of the East India Company. The Grosvenor was launched in 1770, a vessel of the British East India Company. Stout, armed, and spacious, East Indiamen were the lifeline of Britain's global empire. They carried spices, textiles, ivory, and porcelain from Asia to Europe, and on their return voyage bore troops, officials, and goods for colonial outposts. By the late 18th century, these ships had become symbols of wealth and power. The Grosvenor, with her crew of sailors and passengers, was part of this vast network. But the promise of fortune was balanced always against the dangers of the sea. storms, reefs, and the merciless isolation of distant shores. The fateful voyage in March 1782, the Grosvenor departed Madras, India, bound for England. On board were nearly 150 people, crew, passengers, and children, along with a valuable cargo of silk, porcelain, spices, and rumored treasure in gold and jewels. The route took her around the southern tip of Africa, through seas notorious for storms and hidden reefs. On August 4, 1782, while sailing along the coast of what is today the eastern Cape of South Africa, disaster struck. Caught in heavy seas and strong currents, the Grosvenor was driven onto a reef near Lambesi Bay. The crash was violent. Waves tore through the hull, smashing timbers and flooding the decks. The ship was doomed. Struggle for survival. Miraculously, many of the passengers and crew made it to shore. Stranded on a rugged coastline, they faced an unforgiving landscape, dense bush, rocky cliffs, and the vast emptiness of southern Africa. Their supplies were limited, their clothing torn, and the nearest European settlement lay hundreds of miles away. Commander John Coxon made a fateful decision, to attempt an overland march to reach help. Survivors were divided into groups, some led by officers, others left to fend for themselves. What followed was a harrowing journey through unknown terrain, where hunger, exhaustion, and encounters with local tribes determined who would live and who would die. The vanishing castaways. Some survivors perished along the way. Others, according to reports, were taken in by local African communities. European search parties sent later found only traces, scattered belongings, rumors of white children growing up among native clans, and faint whispers of survivors absorbed into a new life. In the end, only a handful of those who set out on the overland trek reached Cape Town alive. The rest of the survivors vanished into history, their fate never fully known. The treasure that was lost, the cargo of the Grosvenor, became the subject of legend. Contemporary records mention silk, porcelain, and spices. But rumors spread that the ship also carried gold, jewels, and treasure belonging to Indian princes or British officials. Over the centuries, treasure hunters flocked to the wreck site. Many claimed discoveries: coins, porcelain shards, and fragments of cargo washed ashore. But no great treasure hoard was ever recovered. Was the fortune exaggerated by rumor, or does it still lie buried beneath the shifting sands and reefs of the South African coast? Rediscovery of the wreck. In the 20th century, divers located the remains of the Grosvenor. Salvage expeditions recovered cannons, anchors, and Chinese porcelain, now displayed in museums. Yet the deeper mystery of treasure remains unresolved. The South African coast is harsh, with pounding surf and strong currents. Much of the wreck may still be scattered across the seafloor or buried beneath layers of sand. And whatever wealth it carried has never been conclusively accounted for. The human story beyond treasure, the Grosvenor is remembered for the fate of its passengers. The accounts of survivors attempting the long march across South Africa capture the desperation of shipwrecked humanity. Families torn apart, children lost, men and women forced into brutal decisions about survival. Stories linger of children assimilated into African communities, never returning to Europe. Some claimed sightings of light-skinned individuals generations later, descendants of castaways. Whether myth or truth, these tales ensure the Grosvenor's human tragedy is never forgotten. Legacy and mystery. The Grosvenor's wreck is more than a maritime disaster. It is a story that reveals the fragility of empire when faced with the raw power of nature. It highlights the human will to survive, even when the odds seem impossible. Today, the story lives on in books, folklore, and the artifacts preserved in museums. Yet the greatest questions remain unanswered: did survivors truly vanish into new lives among local tribes? Does treasure still lie hidden beneath the waves? Closing reflection. The wreck of the Grosvenor reminds us that the sea does not discriminate between rich or poor, officer or child. When ships go down, all are subject to the same fate. As the waves still break on the reefs of South Africa's coast, the unanswered questions of the Grosvenor echo like the surf: what became of those lost lives? And does the ocean still hold the riches that once filled her hold? Until the sea gives up her secrets, the Grosvenor will remain a story of both tragedy and tantalizing mystery. The General Grant, gold beneath the waves. The oceans are filled with stories of lost treasure, but few are as enduring, or as mysterious, as that of the General Grant. An American sailing ship carrying passengers, cargo, and a fortune in gold, it vanished into the darkness of the Southern Ocean. What followed was a desperate struggle for survival, and a mystery that still draws treasure hunters more than 150 years later. A ship of fortune. The General Grant was a three-masted sailing ship built in Maine in 1864. At nearly 1,000 tons, she was strong, fast, and designed for long voyages between America, Europe, and the colonies of Australasia. Like many ships of her era, she carried not only passengers but also cargo, wool, hides, and, crucially, gold. In the mid-19th century, the Australian gold rush was at its height. Gold poured out of the mines of Victoria, bound for the markets and banks of London. The General Grant became part of this golden highway, entrusted with carrying fortune across some of the most dangerous seas in the world. The fateful voyage in May 1866, the General Grant departed Melbourne, bound for London. On board were 83 passengers and crew, along with cargo that included an estimated 2,500 ounces of gold, a fortune in the 19th century, worth tens of millions today. Some accounts suggest private passengers carried additional gold, increasing the value of the lost treasure. The route would take the ship past New Zealand and into the vast Southern Ocean, before rounding Cape Horn. It was a path filled with storms, icebergs, and peril. Into the darkness on May 14, 1866, while passing the remote Auckland Islands, south of New Zealand, disaster struck. Accounts from survivors describe a night of heavy seas and poor visibility. Driven by wind and currents, the General Grant was forced dangerously close to the towering cliffs of the islands. Suddenly, the ship struck rock. Waves pushed her into a sea cave at the base of the cliffs. The vessel became trapped, battered by the surf inside the cavern. The masts jammed against the cave roof, and water surged into the hold. Within minutes, the ship was sinking. Struggle for survival of the 83 aboard, only 15 managed to escape in lifeboats. The rest were lost, trapped as the ship went down in the cave's darkness. Survivors described the cries of those left behind, and the horror of watching the General Grant disappear beneath the waves. The survivors reached shore on the barren Auckland Islands, cold, windswept, and uninhabited. With limited food and no rescue in sight, they struggled to endure. For more than a year, they lived as castaways, building shelters from wreckage, hunting seals, and clinging to hope. At last, after 18 months, a passing whaler rescued the remaining 10 survivors. 5 had perished on the islands from exposure and starvation. The world was stunned, not only by the tragedy, but by the treasure that had vanished with the ship. The gold that disappeared. The General Grant's cargo included thousands of ounces of official gold shipments, packed in crates, as well as private holdings carried by passengers. Altogether, the loss was estimated at over £20,000 in gold, the equivalent of hundreds of millions in today's terms. From the moment news spread, speculation grew. Where exactly had the ship gone down? Was the treasure still sealed in the wreck, hidden in the cave's depths? Or had it been scattered across the seabed? Searches and expeditions. For more than a century, expeditions have scoured the Auckland Islands in search of the General Grant. Treasure hunters, divers, and salvage companies have all tried, and failed, to locate the wreck. The challenges are immense. The islands are remote, surrounded by freezing waters and violent storms. The cliffs are sheer, the caves dark and dangerous. Shifting sands and constant surf may have buried or destroyed the wreck long ago. Yet stories persist. Some expeditions have claimed to find timbers, anchors, or coins, though none have produced conclusive evidence. The lure of lost gold continues to drive new searches, each fueled by the hope that the General Grant still lies hidden in some secret cavern. Legend and mystery. The General Grant has become part of New Zealand's maritime folklore. Tales of survivors haunted by what they saw, of hidden treasure waiting in the depths, and of ships cursed by the attempt to find her, have grown with each passing generation. Some believe the wreck lies sealed within a collapsed sea cave, forever beyond reach. Others argue it must have been torn apart by storms, the gold scattered or buried beneath centuries of silt. A few claim that part of the treasure may have been quietly salvaged long ago, though no proof exists. What remains certain is that no one has yet recovered the lost gold of the General Grant. The human story beyond treasure, the tragedy of the General Grant, is also one of human endurance. The survivors' ordeal on the Auckland Islands remains one of the most remarkable in maritime history. Stranded for over a year, they endured hunger, cold, and isolation in one of the most desolate places on Earth. Their survival is a testament to resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship. For those who perished, whether trapped in the ship or lost on the islands, the General Grant stands as a reminder of how suddenly the sea can turn fortune into ruin. Closing reflection: the story of the General Grant is a blend of fact and legend, part maritime tragedy, part treasure mystery. It is the tale of a ship swallowed by a cave, of castaways clinging to life, and of gold that may still lie hidden beneath the waves. More than 150 years later, the wreck remains undiscovered. Each new expedition is drawn by the same question: is the treasure still there? Until the sea gives up her secrets, the General Grant will remain one of the greatest maritime mysteries of all time, an enduring symbol of both human loss and the eternal lure of gold. The Merchant Royal, the lost treasure ship. The ocean hides stories of fortune and tragedy. Among the countless ships lost to storms and reefs, some carried cargo so valuable that their names became legend. One such vessel was the Merchant Royal, a 17th-century English galleon whose sinking scattered a fortune of gold across the Atlantic. To this day, her treasure has never been recovered, and her fate remains one of history's enduring maritime mysteries. A ship of fortune. The Merchant Royal was an English galleon built in the early 1600s, during a time when Europe's empires battled for dominance on the seas. England's merchant fleet had begun to expand, carrying trade goods across the Atlantic to the Spanish colonies in the New World and returning with silver, gold, and other riches. Commanded by Captain John Limray, the Merchant Royal was part of this growing network of trade and private commerce. For years, she sailed between England, the Caribbean, and Spain, often carrying valuable cargo. But by the early 1640s, she was showing her age. Records describe her as leaky and worn, still serviceable but increasingly risky for transoceanic voyages. The fateful voyage in 1641, the Merchant Royal made a stop in Spain while returning from the New World. There, she took on an extraordinary cargo. Spain, locked in wars across Europe, needed funds urgently. The galleon was entrusted with transporting treasure from Mexico to pay Spanish troops stationed in Flanders. Her holds were filled with immense wealth: 100,000 pounds of gold, 400 bars of Mexican silver, and nearly 500,000 Spanish coins. By modern estimates, the treasure would be worth billions of dollars. But fortune does not always favor the bold. With her heavy load and aging hull, the Merchant Royal was vulnerable. Alongside her sister ship, the Dover Merchant, she set sail for Antwerp. They never arrived together. Disaster at sea. In September 1641, as the galleons sailed north past the coast of Cornwall, disaster struck. Leaks in the Merchant Royal grew worse. Despite constant pumping by the crew, water flooded her holds. Off Land's End, she began to sink. In the chaos, Captain Limray and about 40 men managed to escape in boats, rescued by the Dover Merchant. But more than 18 sailors perished with the ship, and the treasure, tons of gold and silver, went to the bottom of the sea. Reports at the time marked the location as roughly 20 miles off Land's End, Cornwall, in waters deep and treacherous. Almost immediately, stories began circulating of the lost fortune of the Merchant Royal. The El Dorado of the seas. The scale of the treasure gave the ship an enduring nickname, the El Dorado of the seas. Never before had so much gold been lost in a single wreck near European waters. The impact of the sinking rippled through Europe. Spain's troops went unpaid, and the loss added pressure to an already strained empire. For England, the story became both a cautionary tale and a spark of fascination. Sailors whispered of the lost galleon, its holds brimming with unimaginable wealth, lying just beyond reach beneath the waves. Search efforts through the centuries over the centuries, countless attempts have been made to find the Merchant Royal. From the 18th century onward, treasure hunters and salvagers searched the waters off Cornwall. Reports of coins washing ashore only added to the legend. But the search is complicated. The seas off Land's End are among the busiest and most dangerous in Europe, swept by strong currents and storms. Shipwrecks litter the seafloor, many broken beyond recognition. Identifying the Merchant Royal among them has proved nearly impossible. In modern times, with sonar and deep-diving technology, expeditions have continued. Companies have mapped the seabed, hoping to locate the lost galleon. Yet to this day, no confirmed discovery has been made. The mystery deepens in 2007, a US-based salvage company announced it had recovered 500,000 silver and gold coins from a wreck off Spain, sparking speculation that the Merchant Royal had finally been found. But legal disputes and later analysis suggested the treasure belonged to another ship, not Limbury's galleon. The true resting place of the Merchant Royal remains elusive. Was she dragged by currents far from her last sighting? Does she lie in waters too deep for divers of her time, or even ours? Or has she already been found in silence, her gold secretly removed? What was lost? Historians continue to debate the full value of the cargo. Contemporary reports mention 100,000 pounds of gold, 400 bars of silver, and nearly 500,000 coins. Even adjusting for exaggeration, the treasure was immense. But beyond its monetary worth, the Merchant Royal represents something greater, a symbol of the risks of empire, the fragility of fortune at sea, and the mysteries that lie hidden just beyond the shoreline. Legacy of the Merchant Royal. Today, the Merchant Royal is remembered as one of the greatest lost treasures of the sea. She appears in records of maritime history, in folklore along the Cornish coast, and in the ambitions of treasure hunters who still search for her. Every few years, new expeditions set out with advanced scanning and robotics, convinced they are close to solving the puzzle. But the Atlantic has kept its secret. The gold of the Merchant Royal has never resurfaced, and perhaps never will. Closing reflection. The story of the Merchant Royal is a reminder of the ocean's power to both enrich and destroy. A single storm, a single leak, and fortunes meant to shape the fate of nations were swallowed forever. Somewhere off the coast of Cornwall, beneath restless waves, the El Dorado of the seas still sleeps. Each passing year deepens the mystery, as the question lingers, will the treasure of the Merchant Royal ever be found, or has the sea claimed it for eternity? The São José, a slave ship lost to the sea beneath the waves, lie not only stories of treasure and trade, but also of tragedy. Among the countless wrecks scattered across the ocean floor, one ship tells a darker story, of human lives torn from their homeland, of empire and greed, and of a disaster that left more questions than answers. This is the story of the São José Paquete Africa, a Portuguese slave ship lost in the 18th century. A ship of the slave trade. The São José Paquete Africa was a 19th-century Portuguese vessel, built to serve in one of history's most brutal enterprises, the transatlantic slave trade. During this period, ships like her transported millions of enslaved Africans across the ocean, feeding the economies of European empires and the Americas. In December 1794, the São José departed Lisbon under the command of Captain Manuel João. Her mission was to sail to Mozambique, load her human cargo, and carry it across the Atlantic to Brazil, then one of Portugal's richest colonies. For the voyage across the Indian Ocean and around the Cape of Good Hope, the ship carried chains, supplies, and the means to confine and control hundreds of captives. The human cargo. In April 1794, the São José arrived in Mozambique. There, local traders sold more than 400 African men, women, and children into the hands of the Portuguese crew. They were forced aboard the ship, shackled in its holds under conditions of unimaginable cruelty. The plan was to transport them across the Atlantic to Brazil, where they would be sold into slavery on plantations. But the São José never completed that voyage. Disaster at the Cape. On December 27, 1794, while rounding the Cape of Good Hope, the São José was caught in a violent storm. Heavy winds and currents pushed her toward the coast of South Africa. Near present-day Cape Town, the vessel struck submerged rocks and began to break apart. Panic spread. Crew and captives alike were thrown into chaos. Some managed to reach shore, but most were not so fortunate. Records from the time describe a harrowing scene: more than 200 enslaved Africans drowned, trapped below decks or swept away by the sea. Only about half of the captives survived, dragged ashore by the surf. Of the Portuguese crew, most lived, but the voyage was ruined. The wreck of the São José slipped beneath the waves, taking with it not only cargo, but the memory of those who perished. Forgotten for centuries, for nearly 200 years, the São José was little more than a footnote in shipping records. The tragedy was not remembered in Portugal, nor in Brazil. Even in South Africa, it faded from memory. Like so many slave ships, its loss was overshadowed by the larger machinery of empire, and by a world unwilling to confront the human cost of slavery. Yet beneath the sands of the Cape, the remains of the ship still rested, silent evidence of a crime against humanity. Rediscovery beneath the waves. In 2015, a team of archaeologists and divers from the Shipwrecks project, working with South Africa's Ezeco Museums and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, confirmed the wreck's identity. Divers recovered iron ballast blocks, used to weigh down the ship while carrying enslaved people, as well as copper fastenings, timbers, and shackles. Archival research in Portugal provided the missing link, identifying the wreck as the São José Paquete Africa. For the first time in history, the wreck of a slave ship that sank with enslaved Africans aboard had been positively identified. A grave beneath the sea. The discovery transformed the wreck into more than an archaeological site. It became a memorial. Beneath the waters off Cape Town lies not treasure, but the resting place of hundreds of lives stolen from Africa, never to reach the New World. Historians emphasize that the São José is not simply a shipwreck, but a mass grave. Each artifact tells a story, not of wealth and empire, but of loss, resilience, and the brutal system that bound continents together in suffering. The broader mystery: even with the wreck identified, mysteries endure. How many lives were lost that night? Which communities in Mozambique did the captives come from? What were their names, their stories, their families left behind? The ocean keeps these secrets, and archaeology can recover only fragments. Yet the wreck challenges us to remember what was once forgotten, to give voice to those who were silenced. Legacy and reflection. Today, the site of the São José is recognized as a place of international heritage. Soil from Mozambique has been ceremonially placed at the wreck site, symbolically reuniting the captives with their homeland. Exhibitions in South Africa, Portugal, and the United States display the recovered artifacts, connecting communities across oceans in remembrance. For descendants of enslaved Africans, the wreck is a tangible link to a past often obscured or erased. For historians, it provides rare evidence of the transatlantic slave trade in the Indian Ocean world, where thousands of voyages like this one unfolded, many ending in tragedy. Closing reflection. The story of the São José Paquete Africa reminds us that not all mysteries of the sea are about gold or silver. Some are about memory, about lives lost, histories silenced, and truths that must be faced. Off the coast of South Africa, beneath restless waves, the remains of a slave ship still rest. Its timbers bear witness to cruelty, its ballast stones to human suffering. And its silence asks a question we cannot ignore: how many more stories like this lie hidden beneath the sea, waiting to be remembered? The São Bento, wreck of an empire's treasure ship. The 16th century was the height of Portugal's maritime empire. From Africa to Asia, Portuguese ships carried spices, silks, porcelain, and gold, fortunes flowing back to Lisbon. But the seas were unforgiving, and not every voyage ended in triumph. One of the earliest and most haunting wrecks of this age was the São Bento, a Portuguese galleon lost on the wild coast of South Africa in 1554. Her sinking scattered treasure, claimed hundreds of lives, and left behind a story of survival and mystery that still echoes today. A ship of the Indies. The São Bento was a now, a large Portuguese carrack designed for the long and dangerous Carreira de India, the India Run. These massive ships carried goods from Goa, Cochin, and Malacca back to Lisbon, loaded with spices, porcelain, textiles, and precious stones. In 1553, the São Bento sailed east from Portugal, part of a fleet bound for the Indian Ocean. After months at sea, she reached Goa, then the heart of the Portuguese Empire in Asia. There she was loaded with a rich cargo for the return voyage, silks from China, spices from the East Indies, Chinese porcelain, and gems destined for Europe's royal courts. By early 1554, the São Bento was ready to return home. But the ship was already worn, heavy with cargo, and manned by a crew and passengers who faced the most dangerous part of the route, rounding the Cape of Good Hope. The long voyage home, the return voyage, was perilous. Ships leaving India often faced storms in the Mozambique Channel and along Africa's southern coast. With limited navigational tools, captains relied on experience, dead reckoning, and the mercy of the winds. The São Bento joined other ships in the fleet as they turned westward. For weeks they battled storms and strong currents. Supplies dwindled, and the ship began to show her age. Leaks worsened, and her exhausted passengers, sailors, merchants, soldiers, and even women and children, prayed for safe passage. By April 1554, the fleet had reached the waters of present-day South Africa. Here, tragedy struck. The wreck at the mouth of the Msakaba on April 24, 1554, the São Bento was driven ashore by heavy seas near the mouth of the Msakaba River, on the wild coast of South Africa's eastern cape. The wreck was catastrophic. Waves broke the ship apart against rocks. Passengers and crew were flung into the surf, struggling to reach land. Of the over 470 people on board, only about 320 managed to reach the beach alive. The rest were swallowed by the sea along with the treasure-filled cargo. The survivors found themselves on an unforgiving coast, isolated, with no settlements nearby, little food, and no hope of immediate rescue. The ordeal on land with nothing but what they could salvage, the survivors faced a desperate choice: remain on the barren shore or attempt to march north toward Mozambique, where they might find Portuguese settlements. Led by Captain Fernão Alvarez Cabral and other officers, they chose the march. More than 300 men, women, and children set out along the rugged coastline, with almost no supplies. They walked barefoot across rocks and dunes, clothed in rags, under constant hunger and thirst. Local African communities provided some help along the way, food, guidance, and shelter, but survival was far from guaranteed. Disease, exhaustion, and starvation thinned their numbers. By the time the survivors reached the region of modern-day Maputo, fewer than 25 remained alive. From nearly 500 aboard the São Bento, less than a fraction survived the ordeal. The lost cargo. The cargo of the São Bento was legendary. Chroniclers wrote of silks, spices, Chinese porcelain, and gems scattered along the coast. Local people salvaged what they could, and for years fragments of porcelain and other artifacts washed ashore. Even today, occasional finds of Ming porcelain and trade beads in the Eastern Cape are linked to the São Bento. Yet the bulk of her treasure remains lost, buried beneath sand and surf, or carried away by centuries of waves. For archaeologists, these fragments are more than treasure, they are clues to the early global trade network, evidence of how goods from Asia traveled to Europe through Portuguese ships. Memory and legacy. The story of the São Bento became part of Portugal's chronicles of empire. Reports from survivors, preserved in Lisbon, tell of the harrowing march and the despair of those who perished along the way. For South Africa, the wreck is one of the earliest recorded European shipwrecks along its shores, predating later disasters like the Grosvenor. It is also one of the darkest, a reminder of the high human cost of global trade in the 16th century. Archaeologists and historians have studied the wreck site, though much of the ship is gone. Harsh waves and shifting sands have erased most remains, leaving only scattered artifacts and oral traditions in coastal communities. The mystery that remains. The São Bento leaves behind mysteries that will likely never be solved. How much of her cargo still lies hidden offshore, buried under centuries of sand? Could the treasure trove of porcelain and silks one day be uncovered? And what of the many who vanished along the march, assimilated into local communities, or lost without record? The wreck also raises broader questions. How many ships like her were lost without trace? For every Sao Bento remembered in chronicles, how many others sank unrecorded, their stories swallowed by the sea? Closing reflection: the Sao Bento is more than a shipwreck. It is a story of empire, ambition, and human endurance. It reminds us of the fragility of those early voyages, when entire fortunes and hundreds of lives could be undone in a single storm. On the wild coast of South Africa, the waves still crash against the shore where the galleon met its fate. And with every tide, the ocean whispers the same haunting question: what remains of the Sao Bento and the lives and riches she carried? The Santo Cristo de Burgos, the lost galleon of Oregon's coast. The Pacific is an ocean of legends. From Manila to Mexico, galleons once sailed vast distances, carrying silks, porcelain, spices, and silver across waters that swallowed countless ships. Among them was one vessel whose story has haunted the shores of North America for more than 3 centuries, the Santo Cristo de Burgos. Lost in 1693, its wreck gave rise to tales of treasure, ghost ships, and mysterious artifacts that continue to surface to this day. The Manila galleons. To understand the Santo Cristo de Burgos, we must step back into the world of the Manila galleons. Between 1565 and 1815, these massive Spanish ships connected Asia to the Americas, sailing yearly between Manila in the Philippines and Acapulco in Mexico. From Manila, they carried silks, Chinese porcelain, lacquerware, ivory, and spices. From Mexico, they returned with silver from the mines of the New World. These galleons were the lifeline of Spain's Pacific Empire, but the voyage was long and perilous, often lasting 6 months or more, through storms, scurvy, and hostile waters. The Santo Cristo de Burgos was one such vessel, and her voyage of 1693 would become one of the most mysterious of them all. A ship bound for Mexico in 1693, the Santo Cristo de Burgos departed Manila, laden with cargo bound for Acapulco. Her holds were filled with the treasures of Asia: silk cloth, fine porcelain, carved ivory, beeswax, and perhaps even contraband silver. But somewhere in the Pacific, the voyage went terribly wrong. The ship never arrived in Mexico. For years, its fate was unknown. The Santo Cristo de Burgos simply vanished, swallowed by the ocean's silence. Strange sightings in the Northwest. Decades later, far from Acapulco, stories began to spread along the rugged coast of what is now Oregon. Indigenous peoples and later European settlers spoke of mysterious timbers and cargo washing ashore, items that seemed foreign and out of place. The most famous of these were large blocks of beeswax, often inscribed with strange markings. For centuries, chunks of beeswax continued to wash up on Oregon beaches, some carved with Spanish shipping symbols. Local tribes called parts of the coast the place of the wax. Alongside the beeswax came reports of Chinese porcelain shards and timbers from a great ship. Could these be the remnants of the long-lost Santo Cristo de Burgos? Folklore and legend. The strange wreck gave rise to stories that blended history with myth. Local legends spoke of survivors who came ashore and lived among indigenous communities. Others told of treasure buried in the coastal forests or hidden in sea caves. For settlers and treasure hunters, the wreck became known as the beeswax ship. Some believed it carried untold riches, gold, silver, or jewels, hidden somewhere along the Oregon coast. Others saw it as a ghost ship, a reminder of the dangers of the Pacific. Archaeological evidence. In recent decades, archaeologists have examined the mystery more closely. Studies of the beeswax show that it was indeed Spanish colonial trade wax, used for candles in churches. Its markings matched the practice of carving stamps into wax blocks before shipment. Fragments of Ming and Qing dynasty porcelain were also found, consistent with the cargo of Manila galleons. Radiocarbon dating of timbers and ship remains discovered offshore pointed to the late 1600s. Together, this evidence strongly supports the idea that the Santo Cristo de Burgos wrecked along Oregon's coast around 1693, thousands of miles north of its intended destination. how did it happen? The question remains, why did the ship end up so far off course? Historians suggest several possibilities. The northern Pacific route of the Manila galleons relied on catching trade winds and currents. It is possible the Santo Cristo de Burgos was blown too far north by storms, unable to turn south again. Poor navigation, disease, or a damaged hull may have left her drifting until she met the rocky shores of Oregon. Whatever the cause, the result was fatal. The ship likely broke apart offshore, scattering her cargo into the waves and sending survivors, if there were any, into an unknown fate. Treasure or myth? For centuries, rumors persisted that the ship carried not just beeswax and porcelain, but treasure. Stories told of gold coins discovered on beaches, or of jewels found in coastal caves. Yet no verified hoard has ever been recovered. Modern scholars argue that while contraband silver may have been on board, the primary cargo was more practical: wax, porcelain, and trade goods. Still, the allure of lost treasure ensures that the Santo Cristo de Burgos remains one of the Pacific Northwest's most enduring mysteries. Legacy of the beeswax ship today. The story of the Santo Cristo de Burgos is woven into the cultural history of Oregon. Museums preserve pieces of beeswax and porcelain recovered from beaches. Archaeological surveys continue to search for definitive remains of the hull. For indigenous communities, the wreck is part of local heritage, remembered in oral traditions and place names. For historians, it is a reminder of the global networks that tied Asia, the Americas, and Europe together centuries ago. And for treasure hunters, it remains a tantalizing mystery: a ship filled with exotic cargo, lost on a distant shore, its secrets still buried beneath waves and sand. Closing reflection: the Santo Cristo de Burgos is more than just a shipwreck. It is a story of empire, of fragile wooden ships crossing vast oceans, of storms and tragedy, and of fragments that surface centuries later to remind us of the past. On the Oregon coast, pieces of beeswax still wash ashore from time to time. Each fragment is a whisper from 1693, a trace of a galleon lost far from home. And with each tide, one question lingers: does the Pacific still guard the final resting place of the Santo Cristo de Burgos, or will its full story remain forever hidden beneath the waves? The San Roque, a galleon's silent fate across the vast Pacific Ocean. The Manila galleons once traced a route of wealth and danger. These immense Spanish ships carried silks, porcelain, ivory, and spices from Asia to Mexico, and returned with silver from the mines of the New World. For 250 years, they stitched the continents together in one of history's most ambitious trade networks. But the journey was perilous, and not every ship made it across. Among the lost vessels was the San Roque, a galleon whose fate remains shrouded in mystery. The world of the Manila galleons. Between 1565 and 1815, Spain maintained a yearly trade route between Manila in the Philippines and Acapulco in Mexico. Each voyage was a gamble. Ships sailed thousands of miles without sight of land, through storms, scurvy, and unpredictable currents. The rewards were immense. Galleons could carry millions of pesos worth of cargo: Chinese silks, Japanese lacquerware, Southeast Asian spices, and ceramics destined for European markets. On the return trip, Mexican silver filled the holds. This global trade became the economic backbone of Spain's Pacific Empire. But for every triumphant arrival in Acapulco, there were disasters at sea. Galleons were often lost to storms or currents, sometimes never heard from again. The San Roque set sail. The San Roque was one such galleon. Records from the late 17th century describe her as a large, heavily laden vessel assigned to the Manila-Acapulco route. Like others of her kind, she carried hundreds of passengers and crew, along with a fortune in trade goods. At some point in her career, sources suggest around the 1690s, the San Roque departed Manila for the long eastward crossing. For weeks, she would have followed the standard route, sailing north to catch the westerly winds, then turning east across the breadth of the Pacific. But the San Roque never arrived in Acapulco. Vanished without a trace. Unlike some wrecks, where survivors reached shore or debris floated back, the San Roque seemed to vanish completely. No survivors reported its loss, no wreckage was officially recovered. For the authorities in New Spain, it simply became another missing galleon, swallowed whole by the Pacific. Yet whispers and rumors persisted. Some accounts suggest the ship may have been blown far off course, possibly drifting north toward the uncharted coasts of California, Oregon, or even Alaska. Others speculated that she struck storms closer to the Philippines or Hawaii. With no definitive evidence, the fate of the San Roque became a mystery. Legends along the coast in the centuries that followed, stories began to surface along the Pacific coasts of North America. Indigenous oral traditions in regions as far north as the Pacific Northwest told of strange wrecks, foreign survivors, or unfamiliar cargo washing ashore. While many of these tales became associated with other galleons, such as the Santo Cristo de Burgos, some historians believe fragments of porcelain, beeswax, or timbers could also have belonged to the San Roque. With multiple galleons lost in roughly the same era, it is difficult to separate one legend from another. Still, the name San Roque lingers in archival references, a ghostly reminder of a ship that never completed its voyage. The treasure that was lost, like most Manila galleons, the San Roque likely carried immense wealth. Her holds would have been packed with trade goods valued at hundreds of thousands of pesos. Silk bolts, fine ceramics, carved ivory, and spices were certain cargo. Some speculate that she also carried contraband silver and personal fortunes hidden by passengers, making her loss not only a tragedy of lives but also a fortune. If the wreck were ever located, it could provide priceless artifacts of the 17th century global trade. But no confirmed discovery has been made. Archaeological possibilities. In recent years, maritime archaeologists have renewed interest in the fates of missing galleons like the San Roque. Advances in sonar mapping, underwater robotics, and historical research have improved the odds of locating wrecks in deep water. However, the Pacific is vast. Unlike the Caribbean or European coasts, where wrecks can often be narrow to a few miles, the San Roque disappeared somewhere along a route thousands of miles long. Without survivor accounts or floating debris, her final resting place could be almost anywhere. This absence of evidence makes her one of the most elusive of all Manila galleon mysteries. The broader mystery of the lost galleons. The San Roque is not alone. Over the centuries, dozens of Manila galleons were lost without trace. Some were wrecked on the shoals of the Philippines, others dashed against the California coast, and many simply vanished mid-ocean. Each represents not only a fortune in treasure but also the stories of sailors, passengers, and enslaved laborers whose lives ended at sea. The San Roque's mystery is part of this larger story, the human cost of empire and the fragility of wooden ships facing the immensity of the Pacific. Legacy of the San Roque. Today, the San Roque is remembered mainly in archives, its name appearing in lists of lost galleons, its fate marked as missing. Yet her story resonates because of what she symbolizes. She is a reminder of how perilous the Manila-Acapulco trade was, how empires gambled with fortune and lives across oceans, and how much of history remains hidden beneath the waves. For coastal communities of the Pacific Northwest, she remains one of the possible origins of mysterious artifacts washed ashore over centuries. For treasure hunters, she is a tantalizing prospect, another galleon still out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. Closing reflection. The San Roque is a ship remembered not for what we know, but for what we do not. She set sail across the Pacific, carrying treasure, passengers, and the ambitions of empire. She never returned. Somewhere between Manila and Acapulco, in the vast emptiness of the Pacific, the San Roque met her end. Whether she lies beneath the waves of the open ocean or on the rocky coasts of North America, her story remains unfinished. And until her wreck is found, the question lingers, is the San Roque still out there, silent and waiting, another secret of the sea yet to be revealed? The San Pedro, a galleon's last voyage. The Pacific Ocean was once the stage for one of the longest and most dangerous trade routes in history. For 250 years, Spain's Manila galleons connected Asia to the Americas, carrying fortunes in silk, porcelain, and silver. But many of these voyages ended in disaster. One of the earliest and most fateful was that of the San Pedro, a ship whose loss revealed the peril of empire and left behind unanswered questions that endure to this day. The age of the Manila galleons in the mid-16th century, Spain forged a new link between its colonies. From Manila in the Philippines, ships carried the riches of Asia, Chinese silks, Ming porcelain, ivory, and spices, to Acapulco in New Spain, now Mexico. On the return, they brought Mexican silver to fuel Spain's trade in the east. The San Pedro was one of the first of these galleons, launched in the 1560s. She was a massive carrack of timber and sail, designed to endure months at sea. At over 500 tons, she represented both power and vulnerability, built to carry immense cargo, but fragile in the face of storms and currents. The voyage of 1568 and 1568, the San Pedro prepared to sail from Manila back to Acapulco. It was only a few years after Andrés de Urdaneta had charted the Tornaviage, the return route across the North Pacific using the westerly winds. The route was still new, untested, and filled with unknown dangers. Commanded by Don Felipe de Salcedo, the young grandson of Spanish conquistador Miguel López de Legazpi, the San Pedro carried hundreds of passengers and a valuable cargo, silks, porcelains, spices, and other treasures destined for the markets of Mexico and Spain. But the Pacific crossing would test both ship and crew to their limits. Storms in the Pacific. Soon after departure, the San Pedro encountered violent storms. Her heavy hull groaned under the pressure, sails ripped in gales, and leaks began to form. Passengers and sailors alike worked endlessly to keep the ship afloat. Supplies dwindled. Fresh water ran low. Scurvy, the sailors' disease caused by lack of vitamin C, began to weaken the crew. The voyage dragged on for months, longer than anyone anticipated. By the time the ship neared the American coast, the San Pedro was already a wreck in all but name, damaged, leaking, and filled with desperate passengers. The wreck at Cape Mendocino. Historical accounts suggest the San Pedro met her end near Cape Mendocino, on the northern coast of California. Smashed by storms, she ran aground or broke apart in the surf. Most of her cargo was lost to the sea. Of the several hundred aboard, only a fraction survived. Many perished in the wreck itself, while others died trying to reach shore. Local indigenous communities may have encountered survivors, though records are scarce. What is certain is that the wreck marked one of the first major European disasters on the Pacific coast of North America. The treasure that vanished. Like many Manila galleons, the San Pedro carried a fortune in trade goods. Silks, spices, porcelain, and lacquerware, luxuries highly prized in New Spain and Europe, were scattered by the waves. Some may still lie buried beneath sand and surf along California's rugged shores. For centuries afterward, stories spread of porcelain shards washing ashore, or strange artifacts appearing in indigenous trade networks. Were these remnants of the San Pedro? Or perhaps from other lost galleons of the same era? The Pacific coast held many mysteries, and separating fact from folklore remains a challenge. Historical importance. Though tragic, the San Pedro's fate had consequences far beyond its own story. It revealed just how dangerous the new Manila-Acapulco route truly was. Spanish officials realized the Pacific crossing could claim entire fleets if not navigated carefully. In response, new rules were imposed, limits on ship size, stricter cargo loads, and better preparation for food and water. The wreck of the San Pedro became part of the hard-earned lessons that shaped the Manila galleon trade for centuries to come. Mystery that remains, yet mysteries still linger. The exact site of the San Pedro's wreck has never been conclusively identified. Archaeologists suspect it lies off the northern California coast, but centuries of storms and shifting sands may have erased most traces. Did more survivors make it ashore than the records suggest? Were some absorbed into indigenous communities, leaving traces in oral traditions? And does any part of the galleon's cargo still lie hidden beneath the Pacific, waiting to be discovered? These questions ensure that the San Pedro is remembered not just as a historical event, but as a maritime mystery. Legacy of the San Pedro. Today, the San Pedro is often mentioned as the first major Manila galleon to be lost at sea. Her story is preserved in Spanish chronicles and in the broader narrative of the Manila galleon trade. For California, she represents one of the earliest points of contact between Europeans and the Pacific Northwest coast. For Spain, she was a costly loss of treasure and lives. And for historians, she is a reminder of the immense risks of global trade in the 16th century. Like many galleons, the San Pedro embodied both ambition and fragility, a floating empire undone by the raw power of the ocean. Closing reflection: the San Pedro set out across the Pacific with confidence, carrying treasure, passengers, and the ambitions of Spain's empire. But the ocean was merciless. Storms scattered her cargo, broke her timbers, and silenced her crew. Somewhere along California's northern coast, the remains of the San Pedro may still lie buried in the sand, her treasures and her story waiting for rediscovery. Until then, her mystery remains, a reminder that in the age of galleons, fortune and ruin were separated by nothing more than the turn of the wind. The San Francisco Xavier, the galleon the Pacific claimed. The Pacific Ocean is a graveyard of ships, where countless galleons laden with fortune vanished without a trace. Among them was one vessel whose name is remembered in fragments of history, the San Francisco Xavier. Once a proud Manila galleon linking Asia and the Americas, her disappearance became another reminder of the risk Spain's empire faced when gambling with lives and treasure across an ocean that was as merciless as it was vast. The world of the Manila galleons. From 1565 to 1815, the Manila galleons connected Spain's farthest colonies, Manila in the Philippines and Acapulco in Mexico. These ships carried porcelain from China, silks from Japan, spices from the East Indies, and ivory from across Asia. In return, they brought back silver from the mines of New Spain and Peru. The San Francisco Xavier was one of these mighty vessels. Built in the late 17th century, she was designed to carry both cargo and hundreds of passengers across the largest ocean in the world. But the same size and weight that allowed her to haul fortunes also made her vulnerable. Overloaded, undermanned, and reliant on uncertain winds, galleons were always one storm away from ruin. The voyage of the San Francisco Xavier. In the early 1700s, the San Francisco Xavier prepared to depart Manila. Like the ships before her, she was packed with treasures bound for Acapulco, Chinese silks, Ming and Qing porcelain, carved ivory, beeswax for churches, and perhaps contraband silver hidden in her holds. She also carried soldiers, sailors, merchants, priests, and civilians making the dangerous crossing. For many aboard, this voyage was not only about trade, but about survival and hope for a new life in the Americas. Yet, somewhere across the Pacific, the San Francisco Xavier never arrived. Disaster at sea. Historical records suggest the ship was lost around the mid-Pacific. Some accounts describe a violent storm tearing across her path, while others imply she may have drifted too far north or south, missing her intended route entirely. What is clear is that she was never seen in Acapulco, and no survivors returned to Manila. With her went hundreds of lives and one of the richest cargoes of her era. Like many Manila galleons, her loss was at first just a line in colonial records: San Francisco Xavier, missing. But for those left behind, families, merchants, and officials, the silence was devastating. Echoes on distant shores. In later centuries, fragments of porcelain, beeswax, and timbers were reported washing ashore along the coasts of the Pacific. Most were attributed to other famous wrecks, like the Santo Cristo de Burgos. Yet some historians suggest the San Francisco Xavier may also lie among these legends, her cargo scattered on remote beaches of California, Oregon, or even farther north. Indigenous oral traditions from the Pacific Northwest tell of strange ships and foreign goods appearing long before European colonization. Could some of these stories point to the San Francisco Xavier? The lack of definitive evidence leaves the question open. The treasure that vanished. The San Francisco Xavier would have carried an immense fortune. Galleons of her size often bore cargo valued at millions of pesos, enough to fund wars in Europe or fill Spain's royal treasury. Silks, porcelain, and ivory alone would have been treasures for collectors. But if contraband silver or private fortunes were hidden aboard, the value would be even greater. The Pacific, however, took it all. No confirmed treasure from the ship has ever been recovered. Lessons of the loss for the Spanish crown: each galleon lost was more than a tragedy, it was a crisis. The San Francisco Xavier's disappearance forced new restrictions. Ships were forbidden to exceed certain tonnages, captains were urged to reduce cargo, and navigation methods were improved. Yet, despite reforms, galleons continued to vanish. The Pacific crossing remained one of the most dangerous maritime routes in history. The mystery that remains: what truly happened to the San Francisco Xavier? Did she sink mid-ocean in a storm, her wreck lying miles below the waves? Was she blown far off course, wrecking on an uncharted coast of North America? Or did she break apart near Asia, her remains mistaken for another lost galleon? The vastness of the Pacific makes certainty almost impossible. Unlike the Caribbean, where wrecks can be pinpointed, the Manila galleons disappeared into a sea so immense that even with modern technology, their graves remain elusive. Legacy of the San Francisco Xavier. Today, the San Francisco Xavier is remembered mainly in lists of Manila galleons that never returned. Her story may not be as famous as others, but she represents the countless ships swallowed by the Pacific, each carrying lives and fortunes now lost to time. For historians, she is a puzzle piece in the larger story of global trade. For treasure hunters, she is another dream, a fortune that may still lie out there, untouched. And for coastal communities of the Pacific, she may yet be part of the unexplained artifacts and stories passed down through generations. Closing reflection: the San Francisco Xavier left Manila with hope, with wealth, and with the confidence of empire. She never arrived. Somewhere across the largest ocean on Earth, she met her end in silence. The Pacific keeps her secret still. And until her wreck is found, or her cargo washes ashore in undeniable proof, the San Francisco Xavier will remain one of history's enduring maritime mysteries, a ghost ship drifting forever in the imagination. The Concepcion, the Pearl ship's fatal voyage. The Pacific was once a highway of empire, where Spain's Manila galleons carried the wealth of Asia to the New World. But it was also a graveyard. Many ships never arrived, swallowed by storms or hidden reefs. Among them was the Nuestra Señora de la Concepcion, remembered for the vast fortune she carried, the tragedy of her loss, and the centuries of mystery that followed. The world of the Manila galleons. From 1565 to 1815, the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade was the longest and richest maritime route in the world. Once a year, great ships would leave Manila, their holds filled with silks, porcelain, ivory, and spices, bound for Mexico. In return, they carried back silver from the mines of the New World. The galleons were massive, sometimes over 1,000 tons, and carried not only cargo but also passengers, soldiers, priests, and sailors. But size was no guarantee of safety. Overloaded, undermanned, and sailing blind across 10,000 miles of ocean, many never completed the journey. One of these was the Concepcion. The pearl ship the Nuestra Señora de la Concepcion was built in Manila in the early 17th century. By 1638 she was known as one of the largest and richest galleons in the Pacific, carrying cargo valued at more than 2 million pesos, an immense fortune at the time. She soon gained the nickname, the Pearl Ship, not only for the wealth of precious goods she carried but also for the thousands of pearls loaded into her holds, gathered from the fisheries of the Philippines and beyond. Alongside the pearls were silks from China, spices from the Moluccas, ivory, porcelain, and treasures destined for the royal coffers of Spain. But in 1638, this fortune would never reach Acapulco. The fatal voyage commanded by Captain Juan de los Rios Coronel, the Concepcion left Manila in July 1638. She carried nearly 400 people, sailors, passengers, and soldiers, along with the vast cargo. The Pacific crossing was long and grueling. For nearly 4 months, the galleon battled storms, shifting currents, and the constant threat of disease. Supplies ran short, and the ship became dangerously leaky. As the ship neared the Mariana Islands in September, the captain ordered a change of course, trying to reach Guam for water and food. But the Concepcion was sailing too close to reefs and shoals. On September 20, 1638, disaster struck. Wreck on the Mariana Reefs. The galleon struck a reef near the island of Saipan, in the northern Marianas. The impact was catastrophic. Waves pounded the hull, breaking the timbers and flooding the holds. Panic spread among the crew and passengers. Some tried to launch small boats, but many were smashed in the surf. Others clung to floating wreckage. By the time the sea calmed, more than 200 lives were lost. Survivors who reached shore were taken captive by Chamorro Islanders. Some accounts suggest a few eventually reached Guam, while others perished. The cargo, pearls, gold, silver, and trade goods, sank with the ship. The legend of lost treasure. News of the wreck reached Mexico and Spain months later, sparking immediate efforts to recover the treasure. Salvage attempts were made in the 17th century, but divers of the time could only reach shallow areas, recovering little of value. Over the centuries, stories of the Concepcion's lost fortune spread. Sailors spoke of pearls scattered across the seabed, of gold coins lying untouched beneath coral. The wreck became one of the great legends of the Pacific, drawing adventurers and treasure hunters for generations. Rediscovery. In the 1980s, modern divers finally located the wreck site near Saipan. Using advanced equipment, they recovered cannons, anchors, and artifacts, confirming the identity of the Concepcion. Pearls, coins, and porcelain were brought to the surface, many now preserved in museums. The discovery was hailed as one of the greatest Manila galleon finds of the modern era. Yet even today, much of the treasure remains unrecovered, either buried under coral or carried away by centuries of storms. The mystery that remains despite the rediscovery, questions linger. How much of the Concepcion's fortune still lies hidden on the reef? Did survivors carry away pearls or coins that later disappeared into history? And what became of the hundreds of passengers whose lives ended that night in 1638? The Pacific keeps many of its secrets. Even with modern technology, much of the wreck remains difficult to explore, and researchers believe large portions are still untouched. Legacy of the Pearl Ship. The story of the Concepcion is more than one of treasure. It is a reminder of the dangers of empire, when human lives were gambled against the lure of wealth. For Spain, her loss was a blow to the crown's treasury. For the Philippines, she represented the risks faced by countless sailors, soldiers, and civilians pressed into service aboard the galleons. Today, the Concepcion's artifacts are studied not just as treasure but as windows into the 17th century global economy. Each pearl, coin, and shard of porcelain tells the story of a world bound together by fragile wooden ships crossing immense oceans. Closing reflection. The Nuestra Señora de la Concepción sailed with riches beyond imagination, yet she ended as wreckage on a reef, her treasure scattered and her passengers lost. For centuries, her story blurred the line between history and legend. Even today, the reef off Saipan hides more than it reveals. The Pearl Ship reminds us that wealth cannot outlast the sea. And as the waves still break on the reefs of the Marianas, one question endures: how much of her story remains hidden beneath the water, waiting to be discovered? The San Diego, warship beneath Manila's waters. The waters around the Philippines hold the remains of countless ships, vessels of trade, empire, and conquest. Among them, one stands out, a Spanish warship that went down not in storm or silence, but in the roar of cannon fire. Lost for centuries, rediscovered only in modern times, it revealed both the wealth of empire and the fragility of wooden ships in a world at war. This is the story of the San Diego. Spain in the Philippines. By the late 16th century, Spain had established Manila as its gateway to Asia. Through the Manila galleons, riches flowed between the Philippines and the Americas, silks, porcelain, ivory, and spices exchanged for silver from New Spain. But Manila was not just a trading hub, it was also a fortress. European rivals and Asian powers contested its waters, threatening Spain's hold on the archipelago. It was in this world of uneasy empire that the San Diego came to play her part. From trading ship to warship, the San Diego was not originally built for war. She began life as a merchant vessel, constructed in the Philippines around 1590 and named the San Antonio. In 1600, facing the threat of Dutch privateers in Philippine waters, Governor-General Antonio de Morga seized the ship and hastily converted her into a war galleon. Renamed the San Diego, she was outfitted with over a dozen cannons, reinforced hulls, and pressed into service as part of Spain's defense of Manila. But beneath her fresh coat of paint and added guns, she remained a merchant ship at heart, heavy, slow, and ill-prepared for battle. The Dutch threat in December 1600, a Dutch squadron under Admiral Olivier van Noort entered Philippine waters. The Dutch sought to break Spain's control of Asian trade and establish their own foothold. De Morga, commanding the San Diego, set out to confront them near Manila Bay. The Spanish fleet was larger but less prepared. Many ships were hastily converted merchants, their crews untrained in naval warfare. Yet de Morga was determined to fight. The Battle of Manila Bay on December 14, 1600, the San Diego engaged the Dutch flagship Mauritius near Fortune Island, just off Batangas. Cannon fire thundered across the waters. Smoke clouded the decks as both ships exchanged broadsides. The San Diego, heavily laden and poorly equipped, fought bravely but struggled to maneuver. At one point, she even rammed the Mauritius, locking the two ships together in a furious close-quarters fight. But disaster was inevitable. Water poured into the San Diego's hull. Overloaded with men, guns, and supplies, she began to list. By the end of the battle, the San Diego sank beneath the waves, taking around 300 sailors and soldiers with her. De Morga and a few others survived, clinging to wreckage and reaching shore. The Dutch flagship limped away, damaged but afloat. Lost for centuries after the battle, the San Diego slipped into legend. For centuries, her wreck lay forgotten beneath the waters near Fortune Island. Chroniclers remembered the clash between Spain and the Dutch, but the ship itself was lost to time. Fishermen told stories of timbers and artifacts caught in nets. Divers occasionally reported strange objects on the seabed. Yet the precise location of the San Diego remained a mystery. Rediscovery in 1991, more than 390 years after her sinking, French underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team located the wreck of the San Diego off Fortune Island. Excavations uncovered an extraordinary collection of artifacts, over 34,000 items, making it one of the richest shipwreck discoveries in Asian waters. Cannons, anchors, navigational instruments, and the personal belongings of sailors were brought to the surface. Porcelain from China, Japanese samurai swords, Mexican coins, and European jewelry revealed the global nature of trade in the 17th century. The wreck was a time capsule, frozen in the moment of her sinking. The treasure of daily life. Unlike some wrecks famed for gold and jewels, the San Diego's true treasure lay in the everyday objects that told the story of life aboard a galleon. Bowls, jars, utensils, and clothing fragments painted a vivid picture of the multicultural crew, Spaniards, Filipinos, Chinese, Japanese, and Mexicans working side by side on a floating world of empire. The discovery transformed historians' understanding of Manila as a hub of global trade and cultural exchange. The San Diego was more than a warship, it was a microcosm of the 17th century world. Mystery that remains even with the wreck excavated, mysteries endure. Why did de Morga choose to overload the ship, sealing her fate before the battle began? Could the San Diego have survived if better prepared? And what of the hundreds of lives lost? How many stories remain untold beneath the sea? The wreck also reminds us how fragile empire was. Spain's dominance in the Pacific was contested not only by rival powers but by the very ocean itself. Legacy of the San Diego today. The artifacts of the San Diego are displayed in the San Diego exhibit at the National Museum of the Philippines, offering the public a rare glimpse into the 1600s. Visitors can see porcelain bowls once used by sailors, weapons from both east and west, and remnants of the battle that sealed the ship's fate. For the Philippines, the discovery is a source of heritage, tying together its colonial past, its role in global trade, and the lives of those who sailed its waters. For maritime archaeology, it stands as one of the most important wrecks ever excavated in Asia. Closing reflection. The San Diego began as a merchant ship, was transformed into a warship, and ended as a wreck on the floor of Manila Bay. Her story is not just about battle, but about empire, trade, and the lives caught in between. Beneath the waves off Fortune Island, her timbers still rest, a silent witness to a time when nations clashed for power in the Pacific. And though much has been recovered, the ocean keeps its secrets, leaving us to wonder, what else lies hidden with the San Diego, waiting for the tides of history to reveal. Nuestra Señora del Rosario, the treasure galleon that never returned the ocean, is a keeper of secrets, and some of its most enduring mysteries are the ships that left port full of treasure and never returned. Among them was the Nuestra Señora del Rosario, a Spanish galleon of the early 18th century whose sinking turned fortune into tragedy, and whose wreck has left behind questions that linger even today. Spain's treasure fleets. In the 1700s, Spain still commanded a vast empire. From the mines of Mexico and Peru, silver and gold poured into the Americas, then across the Atlantic to Spain. To protect this wealth, the Crown organized treasure fleets, convoys of galleons carrying bullion, trade goods, and passengers, guarded by warships. The Nuestra Señora del Rosario was one of these galleons. Built for endurance and capacity, she was heavily armed and capable of carrying tons of treasure. Alongside silver and gold, she transported cacao, tobacco, and precious gems destined for Europe's markets. The 1702 voyage. In the summer of 1702, the Rosario joined the great Spanish treasure fleet under Admiral Manuel de Velasco, sailing from the Americas toward Spain. The holds were full of wealth, silver bars, chests of gold coins, emeralds, pearls, and trade goods. But war shadowed the fleet. Europe was engulfed in the War of the Spanish Succession, and rival powers, England and the Netherlands, were determined to intercept Spain's treasure ships. The fleet reached the Spanish port of Cadiz, but fearing enemy attack, it took shelter in the smaller harbor of Vigo Bay in northwestern Spain. There, fate caught up with them. The Battle of Vigo Bay on October 23, 1702, a combined Anglo-Dutch fleet attacked Vigo Bay. The battle was ferocious. English and Dutch ships forced their way past defenses, clashing with Spanish galleons and their French escorts. The Nuestra Señora del Rosario, along with many of her sister ships, was trapped in the harbor. To prevent the treasure from falling into enemy hands, crews scuttled their ships, setting them ablaze or sinking them where they lay. In the chaos, the Rosario went down with much of her cargo still aboard. The bay was filled with smoke, fire, and sinking vessels. The great treasure fleet was destroyed in a single day. Treasure lost. Contemporary reports claim that enormous amounts of treasure went down with the fleet, millions of pesos worth of gold and silver. The Rosario's share alone may have included hundreds of tons of silver bars, coins, and bullion. For England and the Netherlands, the battle was a symbolic victory. But much of the treasure never reached their hands. It lay at the bottom of Vigo Bay, sealed in the wrecks of ships like the Nuestra Señora del Rosario. Salvage attempts. In the aftermath, both sides attempted salvage. Early divers using crude bell helmets recovered some coins and bullion, but most of the cargo was lost to the deep mud of the bay. In the centuries that followed, treasure hunters returned to Vigo Bay. Many wrecks were found, yielding coins, cannons, and artifacts. Yet the Rosario herself, like several of the galleons, remained partly buried and elusive. The bay became a legend among divers, an underwater graveyard of one of history's richest fleets. The mystery of the Rosario. The Nuestra Señora del Rosario remains one of the most tantalizing wrecks of Vigo Bay. Some historians believe large parts of her treasure are still unaccounted for, preserved beneath centuries of silt. Others argue that most of her wealth was removed long ago. Modern surveys with sonar and magnetometers have mapped parts of the bay, but the sheer number of wrecks makes identification difficult. Dozens of ships lie close together, many shattered beyond recognition. This confusion keeps the Rosario's fate partly hidden. Was her treasure taken before she sank, salvaged soon after, or does it still rest in Vigo Bay, awaiting discovery? Legacy of the Rosario. The loss of the Nuestra Señora del Rosario was part of a larger blow to Spain's empire. The destruction of the treasure fleet at Vigo Bay deprived the Crown of desperately needed funds during wartime, weakening its position in Europe. For Spain, the event became a symbol of vulnerability, how even mighty fleets could be undone in a single battle. For treasure hunters, the Rosario became a dream, a ship filled with gold and silver, its remains still buried beneath the Atlantic mud. Modern remembrance today, Vigo Bay is recognized not just as a treasure site but as a cultural and archaeological heritage zone. Salvage is restricted, and archaeologists seek to preserve what remains for study. Artifacts recovered over the centuries, cannons, coins, ships' timbers, are housed in museums, telling the story of the great fleet's destruction. For locals, the Rosario and her sister ships are part of the identity of Galicia, reminders of an age when their quiet bay was the site of one of Europe's greatest naval clashes. Closing reflection: the Nuestra Señora del Rosario sailed with treasure meant to sustain an empire. Instead, she lies beneath Vigo Bay, her cargo scattered, her timbers buried in silt. Centuries later, the battle that destroyed her is remembered, but her full story remains incomplete. Did the Rosario's fortune survive the flames and lie hidden still, or was it quietly recovered long ago? As divers continue to explore Vigo Bay, the question endures: what secrets does the sea still keep of the Rosario and the lost treasure fleet of 1702? Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes, treasure, war, and a modern mystery. The sea does not easily surrender its secrets. For more than 2 centuries, the fate of a single Spanish frigate lay hidden beneath the Atlantic, along with a fortune in silver. When it finally resurfaced, it ignited one of the greatest legal battles over treasure in modern history. This is the story of the Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes. Spain at war. In the early 19th century, Spain was caught in the turmoil of the Napoleonic Wars. Its empire stretched from Europe to the Americas, but its wealth depended on treasure ships crossing the Atlantic. Gold and silver from Peru, Chile, and Mexico filled the royal coffers, sustaining armies and feeding a nation at war. The Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes was a 34-gun frigate, part of a small squadron tasked with carrying treasure back to Spain. In 1804, she departed South America under the command of Captain José Manuel de Goicoa, loaded with cargo that symbolized the last breath of Spain's colonial wealth. A ship of fortune, the Mercedes carried more than just cargo. In her holds lay over 500,000 silver and gold coins, alongside copper, tin, vicuña wool, and other colonial goods. Passengers traveled aboard as well, families, soldiers, and merchants, returning to Spain after years in the New World. For Spain, this voyage was critical. But for Britain, at war with Napoleonic France and wary of Spain's alliance, the treasure fleet was a target. Even though Spain was not yet officially at war with Britain, suspicion and opportunity led to confrontation. The Battle of Cape Santa Maria on October 5, 1804, the Mercedes and 3 other Spanish frigates approached the coast of Portugal near Cape Santa Maria. Waiting for them was a British squadron under Commodore Graham Moore. The British demanded the Spanish ships surrender and allow themselves to be escorted to England. The Spanish captains refused. Shots were fired, and the battle began. The Mercedes was struck by a British broadside. Almost instantly, her powder magazine ignited. A massive explosion tore through the ship, shattering her hull. Within minutes, the frigate sank beneath the waves, taking more than 250 lives with her, including women and children. Only a handful survived. The rest of the Spanish squadron was captured, but the Mercedes lay silent on the ocean floor, her cargo lost to history. The legend of the treasure. The destruction of the Mercedes shocked Spain. The loss of life and treasure deepened tensions, and within weeks, Spain formally declared war on Britain. The frigate became a symbol of both tragedy and defiance. For generations, stories of her treasure circulated. Millions in silver and gold coins were said to lie beneath the Atlantic, waiting for discovery. But her wreck remained hidden, untouched, as centuries passed. Rediscovery in the 21st century. In 2007, nearly 200 years later, the wreck was located by Odyssey Marine Exploration, a US-based treasure hunting company. Using advanced technology, they recovered an astonishing haul, 17 tons of silver coins and bullion, along with other artifacts. It was one of the richest underwater discoveries in history, valued at more than $500 million. The find made headlines worldwide, and Odyssey codenamed the project Black Swan. But celebration quickly turned into controversy. The legal battle Spain immediately claimed the treasure, arguing that the Mercedes was a Spanish naval vessel and that its cargo remained the property of the Spanish state. Peru also filed a claim, noting that the silver had been mined from its colonial lands. Odyssey Marine argued that as discoverers, they were entitled to salvage rights. The case went to court in the United States, where years of legal battles unfolded. In the end, the courts sided with Spain. In 2012, the treasure, 17 tons of silver coins packed in thousands of containers, was returned to Spain under military escort. For Odyssey, it was a crushing defeat. For Spain, it was a triumph, reclaiming a piece of its maritime heritage. What the treasure revealed: the recovered cargo included coins minted in Lima, Peru, in the late 18th century. Many were beautifully preserved, providing historians with insight into the colonial economy and minting practices. The find also illuminated the global networks of Spain's empire: silver mined in the Andes, shipped to Lima, minted into coins, then loaded onto a frigate bound for Europe. Each coin was a symbol of labor, conquest, and the immense reach of empire. Mystery that remains, yet even with the treasure recovered, questions endure. How much of the Mercedes cargo was truly brought to the surface? Did some of the silver scatter across the seabed, still lying hidden? And what of the personal belongings of passengers lost in the explosion: letters, jewelry, heirlooms, still sealed within the wreck? The sea rarely gives up everything. The Mercedes remains partly buried, a grave for hundreds of souls. Archaeologists emphasize that beyond the silver, the wreck is a cultural and human site, one that should be studied with respect. Legacy of the Mercedes today: the story of the Nuestra Señora de los Mercedes is remembered not only as a maritime tragedy but also as a case that reshaped modern underwater archaeology. The legal ruling established that sunken warships remain the property of their nations, even centuries later, a precedent that has influenced countless other wreck disputes. In Spain, the treasure is displayed in museums, not as loot, but as heritage. Visitors can see the coins, stacked neatly in glass cases, reminders of both empires' wealth and the lives lost in its pursuit. Closing reflection: the Mercedes sailed with the wealth of an empire. She sank in fire and fury, leaving behind grief, legend, and mystery. When her treasure resurfaced 2 centuries later, it reminded the world that the sea never truly forgets. Yet, beneath the Atlantic, her broken timbers remain, a war grave, a silent witness to the cost of power and greed. And so the question endures: is the real treasure the silver that was raised, or the untold stories that still lie hidden with the Mercedes in the deep? La Vierge du Bon Port, the forgotten treasure ship. The oceans are full of stories of ships that set sail with riches and hope, only to end in disaster. Some are remembered in legend, others fade into obscurity. Among the latter is a French ship with a name that promised safety: La Vierge du Bon Port, the Virgin of Safe Harbor. But for her, there would be no safe harbor. Instead, her voyage ended in tragedy, leaving behind unanswered questions and the possibility of treasure still hidden beneath the sea. France on the high seas. By the 18th century, France had become a major maritime power. Alongside England, Spain, and Portugal, it sought wealth and influence through colonies in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. French ships carried slaves, sugar, coffee, ivory, gold, and silver across the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Ships like La Vierge du Bon Port were the lifeblood of this global empire, wooden giants laden with goods and guarded by cannons, sailing routes fraught with storms and enemies. The voyage of La Vierge du Bon Port. Details of the ship's early history are scarce, but records place her as a French vessel active in the mid-18th century. She was designed to carry both cargo and passengers on long voyages between Europe and Africa. In the late 1700s, she departed on a fateful journey, reportedly from France toward the Indian Ocean. On board was valuable cargo, possibly silver coins, ivory, trade goods, and colonial supplies. Passengers included sailors, merchants, and officials bound for overseas territories. The voyage promised wealth and opportunity. But the sea had other plans. Disaster in the Indian Ocean. Sometime in the late 18th century, La Vierge du Bon Port ran into disaster near the coast of Madagascar. Accounts differ. Some suggest a violent storm drove her onto reefs, while others speak of navigational error in unfamiliar waters. What is known is that the ship never reached her destination. She wrecked off Madagascar's treacherous eastern coast, a graveyard for many ships of that era. Survivors may have struggled ashore, but most of the cargo, and much of the crew, was lost to the sea. For France, it was another reminder of the perils of global trade. For Madagascar's shores, it was the beginning of legend. The cargo of mystery. Rumors grew that La Vierge du Bon Port carried immense treasure, silver coins, gold bars, or jewels intended for colonial trade. Some claimed she bore church relics or royal gifts bound for missionaries in the Indian Ocean. No complete cargo manifest has ever been found, leaving her true contents uncertain. Yet divers and treasure hunters in later centuries reported finding scattered artifacts, cannons, anchors, porcelain shards, and coins. The mystery of what exactly went down with the ship remains unsolved. Was she a treasure galleon, or a more modest trader? Rediscovery. Beneath the waves. In the 20th century, interest in shipwrecks off Madagascar grew. Local divers and foreign expeditions began exploring reefs where the La Vierge du Bon Port was believed to have sunk. Some evidence of the wreck emerged: corroded cannons, ship's timbers, and trade goods. Coins and silver bars attributed to the wreck occasionally surfaced on the collector's market. But no full excavation has ever been conducted, and much of the site remains unstudied. As with many wrecks in Madagascar's waters, looting and poor documentation blurred the lines between myth and archaeology. The mystery that remains. The story of La Vierge du Bon Port leaves more questions than answers. Where exactly does her wreck lie? How much of her cargo remains untouched beneath the sand? And what became of her survivors? Were they rescued, or did they vanish into the island's history? For historians, she is a puzzle, a ship with a holy name, remembered in fragments and rumors. For treasure hunters, she is one of the lost prizes of the Indian Ocean, her wealth perhaps still waiting to be discovered. A symbol of risk and irony. There is also irony in her name. La Vierge du Bon Port, the Virgin of Safe Harbor, was intended to invoke protection for her voyage. Sailors often christened ships with holy titles, hoping for divine blessing on dangerous waters. Yet this ship, despite her name, never reached safety. Her story reminds us that no amount of prayer or preparation could guarantee survival on the open sea. Legacy of the ship. Today, La Vierge du Bon Port is remembered by historians of Madagascar's wrecks as part of a larger pattern: hundreds of European ships that met their end along Africa's coasts. She represents the fragility of wooden empires and the countless lives lost in pursuit of wealth and conquest. Artifacts linked to her, whether coins or cannons, occasionally appear in museums or private collections. But without a full excavation, her story remains incomplete. Closing reflection. The La Vierge du Bon Port sailed with ambition and faith, her name a promise of safety. Yet she found only reefs and ruin. Beneath Madagascar's waves, her timbers may still rest, her cargo scattered, her story unfinished. And so the mystery endures: what remains of the Virgin of Safe Harbor, and what secrets of empire still lie buried in the sands of the Indian Ocean? El Cazador, the shipwreck that changed history. The ocean has claimed many treasure ships, but few had consequences as far-reaching as El Cazador. This Spanish brig, loaded with silver, sank in 1784. Its loss weakened Spain's hold over its colonies, helped pave the way for the Louisiana Purchase, and left behind a mystery that endured for more than 2 centuries. Spain in decline. By the late 18th century, Spain's once mighty empire was in decline. Its colonies in the Americas were restless, its navy weakened, and its treasury nearly empty. In particular, the colony of Louisiana, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico, was struggling. Trade was chaotic, the economy unstable, and Spanish officials in New Orleans needed a solution. The answer came in the form of hard silver coinage. If vast amounts of silver could be shipped from Mexico to Louisiana, Spain hoped to stabilize the colony's economy and reassert control. The vessel chosen for this mission was El Cazador. A ship of silver. El Cazador was a Spanish brig, sturdy but small compared to the great galleons of earlier centuries. In 1784 she was tasked with transporting an extraordinary cargo, over 400,000 Spanish reals, minted in Mexico City. Packed in wooden chests, this silver represented not only wealth but also political power. If delivered safely, it would stabilize Louisiana's currency and strengthen Spain's fragile grip on the colony. Command of the ship was given to Captain Gabriel de Campos, a skilled officer entrusted with the responsibility of carrying Spain's hopes across the Gulf of Mexico. The fateful voyage on January 11, 1784, El Cazador set sail from Veracruz, Mexico. Her destination, New Orleans. A short voyage by oceanic standards, but one fraught with danger. Winter storms churned the Gulf, reefs and shoals lay hidden, and pirates lurked in the shadows of empire. Days passed, then weeks. But New Orleans never saw El Cazador. The brig simply vanished. No survivors returned, no wreckage was reported. For Spain, it was a devastating loss. A silent catastrophe. Without the silver, Louisiana's economy remained weak. Spanish control over the colony faltered further. Within 2 decades, Spain ceded Louisiana to France. And in 1803, France sold it to the United States in the Louisiana Purchase, a land deal that doubled the young nation's size. Historians often note, had El Cazador safely reached New Orleans, Spain might have retained its control. The brig's sinking, in silence and obscurity, changed the destiny of North America. The legend of lost treasure. In the years after the loss, stories of El Cazador spread among sailors and settlers. Rumors told of a ship heavy with silver lying somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico. But with no clear record of where she went down, the treasure became legend. For more than 200 years, divers and fishermen occasionally claimed to have found coins or timbers, but no evidence was conclusive. The Gulf, vast and shifting, kept its secret well. Rediscovery. In 1993, a fishing vessel trawling the Gulf of Mexico hauled up something unexpected in its nets. Instead of fish, the crew found silver coins, caked in mud but unmistakable. Word spread quickly, and archaeologists and salvors confirmed what had been suspected for centuries: the wreck of El Cazador had been found. The seabed yielded chests of reals, minted in Mexico, preserved in the cold darkness of the deep. It was one of the greatest treasure discoveries of the late 20th century, not just for its silver, but for its historical importance. The treasure today. Coins from El Cazador's wreck are now preserved in collections, museums, and even private hands. Many were auctioned, becoming prized artifacts for historians and collectors alike. Each coin is a tangible link to a moment when the fate of empires and nations turned on a single ship. But the wreck itself is more than treasure. Archaeologists study it as a cultural site, examining how the brig was built, how it sank, and what it reveals about Spanish maritime life in the 18th century. Mystery that remains even with the rediscovery. Questions linger. How exactly did El Cazador sink? Was it a storm, a navigational error, or enemy action? With no survivors, the cause is lost to history. And while thousands of coins have been recovered, some believe more treasure still lies buried at the site, scattered by currents or hidden in the sands of the Gulf. The wreck remains partly unexplored, guarded by the shifting waters of the sea. Legacy of El Cazador. The story of El Cazador is unique. Unlike many shipwrecks remembered for their treasure alone, this one is remembered for its consequences. Her loss weakened Spain, undermined Louisiana, and indirectly opened the door for the United States to expand westward. It is a reminder that history can change not just in battlefields and palaces, but in the silent sinking of a single ship. Closing reflection. The El Cazador sailed with silver meant to save a colony. Instead, she vanished, and with her, Spain's hopes for Louisiana. More than 2 centuries later, her treasure rose again from the depths, a reminder of how the sea can shape the destiny of nations. Today, each coin recovered is more than silver, it is a fragment of history, a witness to a shipwreck that altered the map of the world. And as the Gulf waters roll endlessly over her remains, one question lingers: how many other stories like El Cazador still lie hidden, waiting for the sea to give them back? La Lutine, the fortune beneath the North Sea. The North Sea is cold, grey, and unforgiving. Its shifting sands and stormy waters have claimed thousands of ships. Among them lies one whose name is whispered with reverence by divers and treasure hunters alike, La Lutine. Once a French frigate, later a British prize, she sank in 1799 with one of the greatest fortunes ever lost at sea. A ship with 2 lives. La Lutine was launched in France in 1779 as a war frigate. Fast, agile, and armed with dozens of cannons, she was built for speed and combat during the naval wars of the late 18th century. For a decade, she served France with distinction, escorting convoys and engaging enemy ships. But in 1793, amid the upheaval of the French Revolution and Britain's growing naval supremacy, La Lutine was captured by the Royal Navy. Renamed HMS Lutine, she entered British service, now sailing under the Union Jack. For years, the ship was used as a convoy escort, carrying not just war materials but also precious cargo for Britain's global economy. The fortune of 1799. In the autumn of 1799, Britain was embroiled in the Napoleonic Wars. The government needed to stabilize its financial system and fund military campaigns against France. To achieve this, vast sums of gold and silver were shipped across the seas to secure credit and pay allies. The Lutine was chosen for one such mission. On board were tons of gold and silver bullion and coins, packed in chests and guarded by her crew. The treasure was intended to guarantee loans with merchants in Hamburg, strengthening Britain's wartime economy. But the voyage would never reach its destination. Disaster in the North Sea. On October 9, 1799, the Lutine sailed from Great Yarmouth, bound for Hamburg. She never made it. Caught in a violent storm off the Dutch coast, near the island of Vlieland, the frigate was driven onto the shoals. Waves battered her hull, tearing planks and flooding the lower decks. With more than 240 crew and passengers aboard, panic erupted. By dawn, the Lutine had broken apart. Only one man survived. The rest of the crew, and the treasure, sank with the ship into the sands of the Wadden Sea. News of the disaster shocked Britain. The loss of so many lives was tragic, but the financial blow of losing millions in bullion was devastating during wartime. Salvage efforts began almost immediately. Efforts were made to recover the treasure. In the early 19th century, divers using primitive equipment attempted to reach the wreck. Some coins and bullion were recovered, but the bulk of the treasure remained buried. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, salvage expeditions returned again and again. Gold coins stamped with George III's likeness were found, alongside silver bars and ship's timbers. In total, several million pounds worth of treasure has been recovered. Yet much of the fortune is still missing. By modern estimates, more than £100 million in gold and silver may still lie beneath the sands. The Lutine Bell, one relic from the wreck, achieved fame far beyond the treasure. In 1858, divers recovered the ship's great bell. It was presented to Lloyd's of London, the insurance market that had underwritten the treasure. The bell, known as the Lutine Bell, became a symbol of maritime risk. For generations, it was rung once to announce bad news, such as a ship lost at sea, and twice for good news, such as safe arrivals. Even today, it remains one of the most famous maritime artifacts in the world, a reminder of the fortunes lost with the ship. The mystery of the treasure. Despite centuries of salvage, much of La Lutine's cargo has never been recovered. The North Sea's treacherous conditions make exploration difficult. Sand shifts constantly, burying and uncovering wreckage. Storms scatter artifacts across wide areas. Some divers believe large parts of the treasure lie beyond reach, buried under deep layers of silt. Others argue that much has already been salvaged quietly over the centuries, melted down and sold without record. The true amount of treasure remaining, and its exact location, remains a mystery. Legacy of La Lutine. The wreck of La Lutine is more than a story of lost gold. It is a symbol of the fragility of empire and economy in wartime. Britain's financial system relied on ships like her to carry fortunes across dangerous seas. Her loss was not just a maritime tragedy, but a national crisis. For France, the ship represents another chapter in the shifting tides of naval power, a reminder of how a proud French frigate became a British treasure ship, only to meet her fate far from home. For divers and historians, La Lutine is both a grave and a treasure site, one of the most enduring mysteries of the North Sea. Closing reflection. The Lutine sailed with a name that meant, the prankster, and perhaps fate lived up to it. She carried a fortune meant to secure Britain's empire, only to be claimed by the sea within sight of Europe's coast. More than 2 centuries later, her bell still hangs in Lloyd's of London, and coins from her wreck lie in museums and private collections. But the greater part of her treasure remains missing, buried somewhere beneath the restless sands. And so the question endures, will the North Sea ever give up the rest of La Lutine's fortune, or will her gold remain forever out of reach, a glittering secret hidden by the waves? The El Dorado legend, the lost ships of gold. For centuries, the promise of boundless riches has driven men into jungles, across deserts, and onto the open sea. Few myths have been as powerful, or as enduring, as the legend of El Dorado, the Golden One. Born in the mountains of South America, this dream of treasure inspired explorers, conquistadors, and treasure hunters to risk everything. And while El Dorado itself was never found, countless ships sank carrying fortunes that people once thought might be part of the Golden City's promise. This is the story of how the El Dorado legend shaped voyages, wrecks, and mysteries at sea. Birth of a legend. The tale of El Dorado began in the early 16th century, when Spanish conquistadors heard rumors of a great chief in the Andes who covered himself in gold dust and bathed in a sacred lake. To Europeans, this was transformed into a city, then an empire, an imagined land overflowing with treasure. For generations, expeditions marched deep into South America, into Colombia, Venezuela, and Peru, seeking the city of gold. None succeeded. But the myth fueled Spain's hunger for conquest and for the endless flow of treasure ships sailing from the New World to Europe. Treasure fleets of empire. By the mid-1500s, Spain was extracting unimaginable wealth from its colonies. Gold from Colombia, silver from Peru and Mexico, and emeralds from Muso-filled galleons bound for Seville. To many in Europe, this was proof that El Dorado was real, that the New World was, in effect, a land of gold. Convoys of treasure ships, called flotas, became the lifeblood of Spain's empire. Yet they were also magnets for disaster. Hurricanes, reefs, and pirates claimed many. Each time a galleon sank, whispers arose, had the treasures of El Dorado gone down with it? Lost galleons and the golden myth. Some of the most famous shipwrecks became entwined with the El Dorado legend. In 1622, the Nuestra Señora de Atocha sank off Florida with tons of silver, emeralds, and gold. For centuries, treasure hunters wondered if these riches were the very spoils of El Dorado's lands. In 1708, the San Jose galleon went down off Cartagena, Colombia, carrying billions in today's value. The wreck is sometimes described as El Dorado's treasure fleet, because much of its cargo came from Colombian mines that had inspired the original legends. Dozens of lesser-known ships, like the San Roque, Santo Cristo de Burgos, and others, vanished with cargoes of silver and emeralds, forever deepening the mystery. Though these were products of colonial mining, not mythical cities, the line between fact and legend blurred. In the imagination of treasure hunters, every wreck was a piece of El Dorado lost to the sea. The Orinoco and the Guianas. Not all who sought El Dorado stayed on land. In the late 1500s and 1600s, expeditions sailed up the Orinoco River in Venezuela and along the Guiana coast, convinced the Golden City lay inland. Ships became stranded or were wrecked in hostile waters. English explorer Sir Walter Raleigh led expeditions into these regions, his men sailing deep upriver in search of golden kingdoms. His ventures failed, but stories of sunken boats and missing treasure only added to the lore. The dream that shaped history. The dream of El Dorado was never about one ship or one treasure. It was about the belief that unimaginable wealth lay just over the horizon. That belief pushed empires to risk entire fleets. When treasure galleons left Cartagena, Veracruz, or Portobello, they were thought to carry proof that El Dorado was real. When storms or battles claimed those ships, the sea became a stand-in for the lost city itself, an El Dorado beneath the waves. Modern searches today, the myth continues to fuel expeditions. Divers in Colombia, Panama, and the Caribbean scour wrecks of Spanish galleons, hoping to uncover treasure they link to El Dorado. The 2015 announcement of the rediscovery of the San Jose galleon was hailed as the Holy Grail of shipwrecks. Many immediately tied it to the El Dorado legend, since its cargo came directly from Colombian mines. Others argue that every lost Spanish ship, in some way, is a fragment of El Dorado's myth made real. Archaeologists caution that these treasures are not mythical but the result of colonial exploitation. Yet for treasure hunters, the line between myth and history hardly matters. The mystery that remains: the true El Dorado was never a city of gold, it was likely a ritual, a chief covered in gold dust, misinterpreted by Europeans. But the legend had power. It sent fleets across oceans, drove men into jungles, and filled the holds of ships with fortunes so immense that even today, wrecks still yield emeralds, coins, and bullion. And yet, much is still missing. Hundreds of Spanish galleons remain undiscovered, their locations unknown, their treasure scattered across the seabed. In a sense, El Dorado does exist, but it is not in a jungle temple. It is in the countless wrecks of empire, lying in silence beneath the waves. Legacy of El Dorado at sea. The story of El Dorado is not only about gold, it is about human imagination. It shaped the course of exploration, conquest, and trade. It created some of history's richest shipwrecks, legends that continue to inspire divers, archaeologists, and storytellers. From the Atacha to the San Jose, from the Orinoco to the Caribbean, the dream of El Dorado lives on in the mysteries of the sea. Closing reflection: El Dorado may never have been a real city. But the ships that sank chasing its promise are very real. Their treasures lie scattered across the ocean floor, each wreck a chapter in the legend. As long as gold glitters in the imagination, the seas will remain a mirror for El Dorado, a place where the dream of boundless fortune lives on, forever just beyond reach. The Bom Jesus, treasure in the Namibian sands. The sea does not always keep its secrets. Sometimes, the ocean gives them back in the most unexpected of places. In 2008, miners in the Namibian desert made a discovery unlike any other, a 16th-century Portuguese treasure ship, buried not beneath waves, but beneath sand. This is the story of the Bom Jesus, the Good Jesus, lost in 1533, found nearly 500 years later, its cargo intact. Portugal's age of discovery. In the early 1500s, Portugal stood at the forefront of exploration. Its navigators had rounded the Cape of Good Hope, opened routes to India, and carved out a global trading empire. The India Run, or Carreira de India, became Portugal's most important lifeline. Massive ships known as naus carried European goods south, traded for spices in Asia, and returned with pepper, cinnamon, silks, and precious stones. One such ship was the Bom Jesus, launched in Lisbon in 1533. She represented Portugal's ambition, and its risk. The fateful voyage in 1533, the Bom Jesus sailed from Lisbon, bound for India. Aboard were sailors, merchants, and soldiers. Her cargo included trade goods for Asia, but also ballast in the form of copper and silver, and a reserve of gold coins. But she never made it to India. Somewhere along Africa's southwest coast, near what is now Namibia, the ship vanished. Portuguese records of the time noted the Bom Jesus as lost at sea, presumed swallowed by storms. For centuries, her fate was forgotten. Discovery in the desert nearly 500 years later, in 2008, miners working for De Beers in Namibia stumbled upon something extraordinary. While excavating for diamonds along the Skeleton Coast, they uncovered wooden timbers, metal, and coins. Archaeologists were called in. What they found was astonishing: the wreck of the Bom Jesus, preserved beneath the desert sands. Unlike most shipwrecks, this one had not been eroded by waves. It had run aground, broken apart, and been buried by sand and salt, frozen in time. A treasure unearthed inside the wreck. Archaeologists discovered a treasure trove. Over 2,000 gold coins, mainly Spanish and Portuguese cruzados, gleamed as brightly as the day they were minted. Tons of silver coins lay in chests and bags, still marked by royal crests. Tons of copper ingots, branded with the mark of the German banking family Fugger, were stacked as ballast. Weapons, navigational instruments, elephant tusks, and personal belongings painted a vivid picture of life aboard. It was one of the richest shipwrecks ever discovered in Africa, a find so rare it became known as the Namibian treasure wreck. The skeleton coast's deadly grip. The Bom Jesus had wrecked along what is today called the Skeleton Coast, one of the most inhospitable shorelines in the world. Here, the Atlantic pounds the land with relentless waves, and the Namib Desert stretches inland, dry and merciless. Ships caught near the coast often found no safe harbor, only reefs and shifting sands. Survivors who reached shore faced almost certain death from thirst. The Bom Jesus likely struck rocks or shoals, breaking apart before the crew could escape. No records mention survivors. For centuries, storms and sand buried the remains until they lay far inland, waiting for rediscovery. Archaeological insights. The discovery of the Bom Jesus gave historians a rare chance to study a 16th-century ship in detail. Its copper ingots, stamped with European merchant marks, revealed how global trade networks already linked Portugal, Germany, Africa, and Asia. The coins, perfectly preserved, confirmed the immense wealth carried by early Indiamen. The ivory tusks pointed to trade not only across Asia but also with Africa itself. Even the timbers told a story of Portuguese shipbuilding at a time when wooden naus were the engines of empire. Mystery that remains. Despite the treasure recovered, mysteries linger. Why exactly did the Bom Jesus run aground? Was it storms, poor navigation, or the dangerous Benguela current dragging her off course? And what of her crew? Did any survive the wreck and perish in the desert, leaving no trace? Or were they swallowed by the waves before reaching shore? The sands of Namibia hide these answers still. Legacy of the Bom Jesus. The Bom Jesus is more than a treasure wreck. It is a bridge to a pivotal moment in history, when European empires stretched across the seas, when fortunes were gambled on fragile wooden ships, and when the ocean was both pathway and predator. For Namibia, the find was historic, a reminder that the Skeleton Coast holds secrets far older than diamond mines. For Portugal, it was a connection to its golden age of discovery. Today, artifacts from the wreck are studied and preserved, offering rare insight into a vanished world. Closing reflection. The Bom Jesus set out from Lisbon with the blessings of empire and the hopes of fortune. She ended on a desolate coast, broken and forgotten, her treasure buried beneath sand for nearly 500 years. Her rediscovery is a reminder of the sea's strange bargains, how it takes, and how sometimes, it returns. And as the winds still howl across the Skeleton Coast, the story of the Bom Jesus asks us to wonder, how many other ships, laden with treasure and human stories, lie waiting beneath the sands and seas of the world, hidden but not lost. El Ruby, the treasure galleon lost to the Caribbean. The Caribbean is littered with the wrecks of empire, Spanish galleons heavy with silver, Portuguese naus bound for India, English men of war, and pirate ships that preyed upon them. Among these lies the story of El Ruby, a Spanish galleon whose fate remains one of the most tantalizing mysteries of the 17th century. With her went not only a fortune in treasure, but the hopes of an empire struggling to keep its grip on the New World. Spain's treasure fleets. By the 1600s, Spain's empire stretched across the Americas. Every year, fleets of ships carried bullion from the mines of Mexico and Peru back to Seville. Silver from Potosi, gold from Colombia, emeralds from Yuzo, and pearls from the Caribbean filled the holds of ships that became floating treasure vaults. To protect them from pirates and rival nations, these vessels often sailed in heavily armed convoys called flotas. But storms, reefs, and navigational errors remained constant threats. One such treasure ship was the El Ruby. The galleon called El Ruby. Historical records describe El Ruby as a large and heavily laden galleon, sailing as part of Spain's treasure fleet during the 1620s. She carried a fortune in bullion, gold, silver coins, and gemstones, bound for Spain's treasury. Alongside the treasure were merchants, passengers, and soldiers. To many aboard, the voyage promised not just wealth, but safe return to the homeland. But like so many galleons of her era, El Ruby would never reach Europe. The fateful voyage in the early 1620s, El Ruby departed from Havana, Cuba, as part of the returning fleet. Her holds were crammed with cargo, minted silver reals, gold bullion, crates of emeralds, and trade goods. But soon after leaving port, the fleet was caught in one of the Caribbean's most feared dangers, a hurricane. The storm tore across the sea with merciless force. Ships were scattered, timbers splintered, sails shredded. Some vessels managed to limp back to Havana. Others were driven onto reefs or sunk in deep waters. El Ruby was among the lost. Vanishing into the sea. What exactly happened to the galleon is uncertain. Some accounts suggest she struck reefs near the Bahamas or the Florida Keys. Others place her loss farther south, along the Yucatan. Wherever she sank, she took with her hundreds of lives and a fortune in treasure. For Spain, the loss was catastrophic. Every ship mattered, but one as rich as El Ruby represented a direct blow to royal finances at a time when wars in Europe demanded constant silver shipments. The treasure that disappeared. Estimates of the cargo vary, but contemporary reports speak of tons of silver and gold, along with gemstones. The very name, El Ruby, fueled speculation that she carried precious stones, perhaps including a collection of rubies or emeralds destined for Spain's aristocracy. None of it was ever recovered. The storm left no survivors, and no reliable records of the wreck site. For centuries, her treasure remained one of the Caribbean's great mysteries. Legends and rumors in the centuries that followed, whispers of El Ruby spread among sailors, treasure hunters, and coastal communities. Stories told of coins washing ashore after hurricanes, or fishermen retrieving silver bars in their nets. Some treasure hunters claimed to have found timbers and scattered artifacts, but no definitive wreck was ever confirmed. Like many lost galleons, the ship became part of folklore, half history and half legend. The search for El Ruby in the modern era, El Ruby has attracted the attention of archaeologists and salvors alike. Advances in sonar mapping, magnetometers, and underwater robotics have made it possible to explore the seabed in ways early salvagers could not. Expeditions in the waters of Cuba, the Bahamas, and Florida Keys have uncovered numerous Spanish wrecks. Some yielded coins and bullion, but none have been conclusively identified as El Ruby. The Caribbean, rich in wrecks, still guards her secret. Mystery that remains: did El Ruby sink in shallow waters, where shifting sands still conceal her? Or does she lie deep, beyond the reach of divers? Could her treasure already have been scattered and looted centuries ago, explaining why no hoard has ever been found? With hundreds of galleons lost in the region, separating one wreck from another is almost impossible. Yet the legend of El Ruby persists, because her treasure was said to be among the richest ever lost to the Caribbean. Legacy of El Ruby. The story of El Ruby captures the essence of the age of empire, fortunes carried across oceans, empires dependent on fragile ships, and the constant shadow of loss. For Spain, each shipwreck was not just a financial disaster, but a reminder of how fragile its power was. For treasure hunters, El Ruby represents the eternal allure of lost gold, a ship whose very name evokes gems and riches, waiting to be discovered. And for historians, she is a symbol of how myth and fact intertwine at sea, how stories of hurricanes, treasure, and loss survive long after timbers rot. Closing reflection. The El Ruby left Havana with riches that could have changed fortunes in Spain. Instead, she vanished into the storm, leaving only whispers and dreams. Somewhere in the Caribbean, beneath coral and sand, her treasure may still rest, silent but enduring. And until the sea gives up her secret, the galleon called El Ruby will remain one of history's great maritime mysteries, a ruby of legend, hidden by the waves.